Geometric View. I'm Buddy James, your host. This is Season 2, Episode 2, The Geometry of Light, Divergence and Curl, Brachistochrone Curvature, Maxwell's Equations, Twistors, Higher Dimensional Spheres in the Dougherty Networks. All right, welcome everybody to the Geometric View. This is Season 2, Episode 2, and we will be talking about the geometry of light. And we were having a little bit of difficulty in people joining the group, so hopefully they can catch up and hop on. I had a little bit of issues of sharing some of the pictures for the day, so I'm going to show them right now. Check these out. This and probably come back to showing some of the images because this is a central theme to today's show, which would be the Brachistochrone curvature and how light follows the Brachistochrone curvature. So yeah, I'm gonna type in the box here in the chat to let people know that, oh, we got Brian on. Okay, that's who I was hoping would, and maybe Michael or...
I messaged Michael.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate it. All right, I really appreciate you guys working with me through some of these difficulties. I'm on a new setup. As you can see, I just got plain white in the background, but some of these images are what we're going to cover today, and more particularly, like I was talking about, the Brachistochrone curvature. And for this episode, we're doing the geometry of light. So I'm going to show you some of these images first here. You can see the pink and the green D-shaped butterfly wings, and these are all over the earth, these D-shaped butterfly wings, and geological records, we can see them. Now you can see that there's a preponderance of pink ones that are all going in one direction, and then there's two green ones. These two green ones right here are going this direction, which has that chirality. So this is basically the optimization of vorticity or vortical flow inside of the network. And right down the central axis would be what Walter Russell refers to as the fulcrum. And that is a gate, which would be equal 0. All things are unfolding off of the 0, or the hollow holiness. Hollow would be it. Holy is its name, and hollow is what the central axis seems to be. So you can turn it like this, and you can see more that there is a type of twisting and twirling going on there, and that is the Brachistochrone curvature inside of the Dougherty set. So you have the green chirality going down that way, and then you have the pink spin going down this way. Ultimately produces the patterning of pine cones. So it's a pine coning pattern is what I refer to it as. I like leaving my mouse in the same spot and moving the drawing. That works. So you can see that it ultimately collapses down into a cardioid. And the cardioid is important because the cardioid is how light reverses, and how when it reverses, there's a bunch of important stuff about cardioids. So that's the same exact thing that I showed you on the other image, but with only the sphere showing. Now I'm going to show you with all of the pine cone layering, and you can see the green chirality coming in down here and moving around. Then you can see the pink. But these petals, these these petals are really important because they're showing they are light foliations. That's what these petals literally are. I'm kind of starting the episode backwards because I was going to present my images at the end, but I'm putting them at the front. These are Brachistochrone lenses, and they're braided quaternion filaments. These are braided quaternion filaments, and I highlighted the Brachistochrone lenses, which could also be referred to as trion rays. Those lenses that are moving through it, that are natural parts of the spherical system. I've been sharing most of our stuff on the Electric View News channel because it's a really good place to network and to put all of the stuff and build up episodes. So I want us to start utilizing that resource. It's still called the Electric View News, which is fine because we're the sister channel. But I want to do one for the Geometric View News as well, but it's on Facebook. You can find it on Facebook. It's right here. This is for all the viewers out there if you want to be part of it. It's not really a sharing thing. It's more like my thing, where I set up the episodes, but there's plenty of content to look at it and look through. So Brighton, I'm going to ask you if you could go to that, and we're going to go to this video to learn about what electromagnetism is and what light is and what exactly is the mathematics of light. And it's a lot simpler than it looks. And we're going to make that hopefully more apparent during this episode. There's a lot of copywritten stuff that I'm going to be playing, but we're not looking for money. We're looking to teach. So this is a teaching resource, and all of the YouTube videos that I'm playing, I'm very thankful for each one of them. We get copyright strikes on 4 episodes so far out of our 13 episodes. So that's not too bad, but I don't really care about copyright strikes. Like I said, I'm not trying to make money, and I don't think any of us are here. We're all here out of free will, and we're sharing ideas and circulating other ideas that are already there. And sometimes other people can explain things better than we can. So we just need to be humble and allow that to happen, I think, and listen to other people explain it, and then try to break it down ourselves and show other ways that it correlates to things that we're working on. So, Brighton, whenever you're ready, I can hit play on
this. Were in the where?
If you go onto Facebook and you go to the Electric View News, I should have already added you.
Yeah.
And then you go to Divergence and Curl, and it's an episode of 3 blue, 1 brown. And if it's easier for you to just pull it up this way, here it is. So while Brighton does that, I'm going to talk about I guess some more of the directions of where we're going with this. We're going to get into spheres, not too much of spherical propagation, but sphere stacking, higher dimensional sphere stacking, crystal lattices. What is a quasi crystal? Why are quasi crystals important? How is the Dougherty network a quasi crystal, and how does that allow us to understand more about higher dimensional geometries and how light braids through space and time? So whenever you're ready, let me know, Brighton.
I'm not finding it in here. Can you give the name of the video? 3 blue,
I can
1
copy
brown.
it, paste it. I can copy it right here. Sorry. Copy. I can paste it right in our group chat, which is what I'll do. If you type in on YouTube Divergence and Curl, it might come in, but here it is. Paste. Yeah, but it's going to be necessary for you to get into the Electric View News, because all of our stuff, all of our content's on there. And today we're going to play quite a bit.
Is the Electric View a different group than the Electric View News?
Yes. I already tried to add you to it. I think you're already on it. Let me see the group of people who are in it here. Da, da. Michael McDuffie's in it. I tried to invite you.
Okay.
Invite members. A, B, Y, S, S. Oh, there you are. Friend. Oh. Boom. Person already invited. Oh, you got to accept your invite, bro.
Yeah, I just accepted it.
Oh.
All right.
Okay. Well, this is good because this is where some of the content is, and it's okay for the YouTubers to check it out and know that we have these back windows and back doors, and it is something that we're all working on. Go ahead, Heather. Someone was saying something.
No, that was an ad. I got the
Oh,
video.
yeah. Okay, perfect. Let me see.
That did sound just like Heather, though. I thought it was her too.
Soon everyone will sound like me. I'm all the way in the future.
The voice of the future.
So when I watched this earlier this week, I had no idea what this episode was going to be about until like yesterday when I watched this, and I didn't even take note because it just blew my mind. We're just going to watch it, and then we're going to watch other things, and we're going to have like a hangout, get cozy in your pajamas, and talk about light. So that's just what we're going to do. We're going to relax and sit back and chill and watch other people's videos, talk about our content and how this all relates. And it's a lot easier to understand than you think. Good to go?
Yeah, ready.
All right. 3, 2, 1.
Today, you and I are going to get into divergence and curl. To make sure we're all on the same page, let's begin by talking about vector fields. Essentially, a vector field is what you get if you associate each point in space with a vector, some magnitude and direction. Maybe those vectors represent the velocities of particles of fluid at each point in space, or maybe they represent the force of gravity at many different points in space, or maybe a magnetic field strength. Quick note on drawing these, often if you were to draw the vectors to scale, the longer ones end up just cluttering up the whole thing. So it's common to basically lie a little and artificially shorten ones that are too long, maybe using color to give some vague sense of length. Now in principle, vector fields in physics might change over time. In almost all real-world fluid flow, the velocities of particles in a given region of space will change over time in response to the surrounding context. Wind is not a constant, it comes in gusts. An electric field changes as the charged particles characterizing it move around. But here, we'll just be looking at static vector fields, which maybe you think of as describing a steady-state system. Also, while such vectors could in principle be three-dimensional, or even higher, we're just going to be looking at 2 dimensions. An important idea, which regularly goes unsaid, is that you can often understand a vector field which represents one physical phenomenon better by imagining what if it represented a different physical phenomenon? What if these vectors describing gravitational force instead defined a fluid flow? What would that flow look like? And what can the properties of that flow tell us about the original gravitational force? And what if the vectors defining a fluid flow were thought of as describing the downhill direction of a certain hill? Does such a hill even exist? And if so, what does it tell us about the original flow? These sorts of questions can be surprisingly helpful. For example, the ideas of divergence and curl are particularly viscerally understood when the vector field is thought of as representing fluid flow, even if the field you're looking at is really meant to describe something else, like an electric field. Here, take a look at this vector field, and think of each vector as describing the velocity of a fluid at that point. Notice that when you do this, that fluid behaves in a very strange, non-physical way. Around some points, like these ones, the fluid seems to just spring into existence from nothingness, as if there's some kind of source there. Some other points act more like sinks, where the fluid seems to disappear into nothingness. The divergence of a vector field at a particular point of the plane tells you how much this imagined fluid tends to flow out of or into small regions near it. For example, the divergence of our vector field, evaluated at all of those points that act like sources, will give a positive number. And it doesn't just have to be that all of the fluid is flowing away from that point. The divergence would also be positive if it was just that the fluid coming into it from one direction was slower than the flow coming out of it in another direction, since that would still insinuate a certain spontaneous generation. Now on the flip side, if in a small region around a point there seems to be more fluid flowing into it than out of it, the divergence at that point would be a negative number.
Like the sun.
Remember, this vector field is really a function that takes in two-dimensional inputs and spits out two-dimensional outputs. The divergence of that vector field gives you a new function, one that takes in a single 2D point as its input, but its output depends on the behavior of the field in a small neighborhood around that point. In this way, it's analogous to a derivative, and that output is just a single number, measuring how much that point acts as a source or a sink. I'm purposefully delaying discussion of computations here. The understanding for what it represents is more important. Notice, this means that for an actual physical fluid, like water, rather than some imagined one used to illustrate an arbitrary vector field, then if that fluid is incompressible, the velocity vector field must have a divergence of 0 everywhere. That's an important constraint on what kinds of vector fields could solve real-world fluid flow problems. For the curl at a given point, you also think about the fluid flow around it, but this time, you ask how much that fluid tends to rotate around the point. As in, if you were to drop a twig in the fluid at that point, somehow fixing its center in place, would it tend to spin around? Regions where that rotation is clockwise are said to have positive curl, and regions where it's counterclockwise have negative curl. And it doesn't have to be that all of the vectors around the input are pointing counterclockwise or all of them are pointing clockwise. A point inside a region like this one, for example, would also have non-zero curl, since the flow is slow at the bottom, but quick up top, resulting in a net clockwise influence. And really, true proper curl is a three-dimensional idea, one where you associate each point in 3D space with a new vector characterizing the rotation around that point according to a certain right-hand rule. And I have plenty of content from my time at Khan Academy describing this in more detail if you want, but for our main purpose, I'll just be referring to the two-dimensional variant of curl, which associates each point in 2D space with a single number rather than a new vector. As I said, even though these intuitions are given in the context of fluid flow, both of these ideas are significant for other sorts of vector fields. One very important example is how electricity and magnetism are described by 4 special equations. These are known as Maxwell's equations, and they're written in the language of divergence and curl. This top one, for example, is Gauss's law, stating that the divergence of an electric field at a given point is proportional to the charge density at that point. Unpacking the intuition for this, you might imagine positively charged regions as acting like sources of some imagined fluid, and negatively charged regions as being the sinks of that fluid. And throughout parts of space where there is no charge, the fluid would be flowing incompressibly, just like water. Of course, there's not some literal electric fluid, but it's a very useful and a very pretty way to read an equation like this. Similarly, another important equation is that the divergence of the magnetic field is 0 everywhere. And you can understand that by saying that if the field represents a fluid flow, that fluid would be incompressible with no sources and no sinks. It acts just like water. This also has the interpretation that magnetic monopoles, something that acts just like a north or a south end of a magnet in isolation, don't exist. There's nothing analogous to positive and negative charges in an electric field. Likewise, the last 2 equations tell us that the way that one of these fields changes depends on the curl of the other field. And really, this is a purely 3-dimensional idea, and a little outside of our main focus here. But the point is that divergence and curl arise in contexts that are unrelated to flow. And side note, the back and forth from these last 2 equations is what gives rise to light waves. And quite often, these ideas are useful in contexts which don't even seem spatial in nature at first. To take a classic example that students of differential equations often study, let's say that you wanted to track the population sizes of two different species, where maybe one of them is a predator of another. The state of this system at a given time, meaning the two population sizes, could be thought of as a point in two-dimensional space, what you would call the phase space of this system. For a given pair of population sizes, these populations may be inclined to change based on things like how reproductive are the two species, or just how much does one of them enjoy eating the other one. These rates of change would typically be written analytically as a set of differential equations. It's okay if you don't understand these particular equations. I'm just throwing them up for those of you who are curious, and because replacing variables with pictures makes me laugh a little bit. But the relevance here is that a nice way to visualize what such a set of equations is really saying is to associate each point on the plane, each pair of population sizes, with a vector, indicating the rates of change for both variables. For example, when there are lots of foxes but relatively few rabbits, the number of foxes might tend to go down because of the constrained food supply, and the number of rabbits might also tend to go down because they're getting eaten by all of the foxes, potentially at a rate that's faster than they can reproduce. So a given vector here is telling you how and how quickly a given pair of population sizes tends to change. Notice, this is a case where the vector field is not about physical space, but instead it's a representation of a certain dynamic system that has two variables and how that system evolves over time. This can maybe also give a sense for why mathematicians care about studying the geometry of higher dimensions. What if our system was tracking more than just 2 or 3 numbers? Now, the flow associated with this field is called the phase flow for our differential equation, and it's a way to conceptualize, at a glance, how many possible starting states would evolve over time. Operations like divergence and curl can help to inform you about the system. Do the population sizes tend to converge towards a particular pair of numbers, or are there some values that they diverge away from? Are there cyclic patterns? And are those cycles stable or unstable? To be perfectly honest with you, for something like this, you'd often want to bring in related tools beyond just divergence and curl. Those would give you the full story. But the frame of mind that practice with these two ideas brings you carries over well to studying setups like this with similar pieces of mathematical machinery. Now, if you really want to get a handle on these ideas, you'd want to learn how to compute them and to practice those computations. And I'll leave some links to where you can learn about this and practice if you want. Again, I did some videos and articles and worked examples for Khan Academy on this topic during my time there, so too much detail here will start to feel redundant for me. But there is one thing worth bringing up regarding the notation associated with these computations. Commonly, the divergence is written as a dot product between this upside-down triangle thing and your vector field function, and the curl is written as a similar cross product. Sometimes students are told that this is just a notational trick. Each computation involves a certain sum of certain derivatives, and treating this upside-down triangle as if it was a vector of derivative operators can be a helpful way to keep everything straight. But it is actually more than just a mnemonic device. There is a real connection between divergence and the dot product, and between curl and the cross product. Even though we won't be doing practice computations here, I would like to give you at least some vague sense for how these 4 ideas are connected. Imagine taking some small step from one point of your vector field to another. The vector at this new point will likely be a little bit different from the one at the first point. There will be some change to the function after that step, which you might see by subtracting off your original vector from that new one. And this kind of difference to your function over small steps is what differential calculus is all about. Now, the dot product gives you kind of a measure of how aligned two vectors are, right? Now, the dot product of your step vector with that difference vector that it causes tends to be positive in regions where the divergence is positive, and vice versa. In fact, in some sense, the divergence is a sort of average value for this dot product of a step with a change to the output that it causes over all possible step directions, assuming that things are rescaled appropriately. I mean, think about it. If a step in some direction causes a change to that vector in that same direction, this corresponds to a tendency for outward flow, for positive divergence. And on the flip side, if those dot products tend to be negative, meaning the difference vector is pointing in the opposite direction from the step vector, that corresponds with a tendency for inward flow, negative divergence. Similarly, remember that the cross product is a sort of measure for how perpendicular two vectors are. So the cross product of your step vector with the difference vector that it causes tends to be positive in regions where the curl is positive, and vice versa. You might think of the curl as a sort of average of this step vector difference vector cross product. If a step in some direction corresponds to a change perpendicular to that step, that corresponds to a tendency for flow rotation. So typically, this is the part where there might be some kind of sponsor message. But one thing I want to do with the channel moving ahead is to stop doing sponsored content and instead make things just about the direct relationship with the audience. I mean that not only in the sense of the funding model with direct support through Patreon, but also in the sense that I think these videos can better accomplish their goal if each one of them feels like it's just about you and me sharing in a love of math with no other motive, especially in the cases where the viewers are students. There are some other reasons, and I have my full thoughts on this over on Patreon.
Yeah.
I know, it was like that perfect bit at the end, isn't it?
It's just where it lives.
I had to keep it there for that. So, isn't that amazing, guys? I thought that.
Yeah, dude.
Go ahead.
Oh, all those pictures. I put in a bunch of pictures. It was like a file that I made. I actually have a way huger file than that, but it's all about sinks in this dynamic exactly. So there's a lot. Yeah, it was touching on all of these things, and I actually did a diagram that I put in the chat a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now. That was the astrological interpretation of the motions that you're describing, but in extremely simple terms. So yeah, let's do this.
Yeah. There's a couple of different ways. I've heard this called a certain thing, but everybody refers to it as different names now, whatever. But we can see it ultimately leads to divergence and curl. And that model came out of the vortex understanding of mathematics. Reading these books about the history of the vortex really allows me to understand, by Vladimir V. Ginsburg, by the way, really allows me to understand how long we've been finding the truth inside the vortex and trying to correlate a language that we can use that makes sense with everything using the vortex and as a base model. But this
can I add in right there as you're speaking, buddy? You're absolutely right. When you said that, the first thing that come to mind is my first quandary is how do you explain what came without words? You know what I mean? And I think that's why a lot of us are artists in all this. And Heather's correlation about how it matches to the cosmos. And it does. This is all a thought out conscious geometry. And I was thinking of that earlier today in respect of how you always put out the topic matter beforehand. And I thought about that everything was perfect before anything was ever put into place. And then it was put into place, and then there it was. And that's where we're at right now. We're just trying to pick up the pieces and decipher what's there, and the hardest thing is as we said, putting into words with that, like the Tower of Babel, where they all make sense to everyone and we can all meet somewhere in the middle, the dead middle. But thank you. Go on. I just wanted to add that in there, that is our hardest thing, that this all comes from, the vibration before there's words.
Well, and we got to remember, Maxwell left his two best friends and departed from the vortex theory, and there was another theory that they were working on at the same time, and came up with this purely mathematical theory, and it happened to work, and all the other ideas were scrapped because it worked and it was right. Now, using this mathematics, we can go forward and to 1967 or so, or we can talk about the mathematics between that and the science between that as well. But then you get Roger Penrose's theory on twistors and the Hopf fibrations and things like this, and that's going to be exciting to get into. But before all this and after all this, there was the plasma physicists. And the plasma physicists were interested in flows and flow dynamics. And I mean, albeit all religions have been understanding the cosmic serpent and call it something in their own language and refer to it as the creator in some way or another, because we know we're on that filament thread. So Heather, please tell us a little bit more about this image here you found. I mean, I could go on about it, but I don't want to be the only one talking.
It's just it's uniform flow going in, going out, and going around. It's just showing the basic motions of it. I just went click, 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 and started clicking things that looked applicable to this conversation, and then so I'm not sure exactly what it was. Kind of like that's why it all came in at once, and I'm like, oh God, I'm sorry.
So the vortex here would be an inward flow. If there were an inward flow or a sink, that would be negative divergence, according to the divergence and curl theory. So do you think the sun is a sink?
I've often actually wondered if, because everybody is it a sink? Is it what is the sun? What is it actually doing? Why are we kept in a space here?
I'm not putting a hat on it as far as, saying it's concrete, but the way I've looked at it since I've discovered plasma energies and the electromagnetic lenses they look out in the solar system universe with, is that basically the sun is like the filament part that lights up, you know what I mean? That it's between the filament that's held like two fingers, you know what I mean? As if they had energy running between them like two cords. Right. And that holds in, and that's tied into Sirius A and B. And then all of our planets are all mapped into that, like bumper cars on that grid that's, above them as we all drive around and bump into each other, but this way we wouldn't, but like a carousel. And they're all communicated to each other through the sun. And so therefore we share the same, a three-rounded cord where we have our neutral, our ground, and our load. And then one actually comes as a bonded groundedness, which is called a floating neutral in Ford's dynamics of their engineering schematics of electricity. So that's the way I look at the sun, is that the sun's actually like a filament, and that plasma energy is what's feeding it. They also used to say that it was going to run out, but now with plasma energy, it shows that it's actually being fed from an ulterior source, an outside, not so much outside source, but a flowing source. So It never will run out until it's decided that it runs out. And that's the way I see the sun now that I've discovered plasma energy. And when I looked at, I wanted to ask you just before this conversation, or not, but I got into my topic there, but have anybody here seen some of the conscious plasma energy videos that they got, where they've hit it with energy, they've given it blockades, you know what I mean? They've putting up obstacles in front of it. And the conscious plasma flowing energy always finds its own way. It always finds its path of least resistance. It also actually thinks around whatever they put in front of it. And I think that's one thing that they'll never be able to explain without literally adhering to the word consciousness, which means that there's a greater mind. So go ahead, what say you?
Yeah, this is the model that I have on my t-shirt that I got from the conference at the Thunderbolts Project. And it is the homopolar motor model of the sun, which is the same model that we were showing on episode 3, maybe, of the first season, when we went into the geometry of black holes, nucleosynthesis, and the geometry of the sun and black holes, and nucleosynthesis being the same on all scales, It's the same geometry, just sized and scaled down for the micro or the macro, or the Planck or sub-Planck or quantum foam, quantum spin foam, whatever you want to call it. Whatever you want to call it. So we're getting into how I want to give people the tools so that they can prove what light is, based off of these videos that we're showing, based off of the diagrams you're already working with. We're getting into breaking it down into simplistics and what exactly is light. And we're going to start here with that video. And for that video, we played Divergence and Curl just to give us a mathematical platitude to associate and to transcribe our ideas into actual mathematics of light. So that's kind of where we want to go, is can we break this down? Is this something we can geometricize into some sort of a network or a system of spheres, of cascading things coming off of the sun? Maybe curl and divergence is a lot simpler than we think, is kind of what I'm getting at. And you can see it. Luckily, I have these images here because my other stuff wasn't opening. Maybe I got to double click on it. Divergence and curl. Now look at that. And nesting and subnesting of filaments. And harmonizing and winding and binding up space weather, space dust, space particles, solar radiation into resonant sounds that cascade down to the earth with the auroras is what I'm talking about. And this right here is an image of Whistler waves, which are helicon waves. And that just happened to be one of the images that popped up inside here. This is some images from last year. Hopefully no naughty images pop up. This is from my camera. So yeah, I shared something today, but you got David LaPointe's primer fields. There's the sun, here's the incoming, there's the outgoing, but you also have there's the quote unquote dielectric field here that matter aggregates to. So these are some good maps. Is this Russell? Oh no, this is what's that guy's name? Babbitt? Who is this? I'm trying to find the cover. These are all good though. We can just go through these. They might be upside down, they might not be. But it's the geometry of sound. Does it have his name on these? It might be Keeley. Yeah, this might be Keeley's charts of music. So whilst we're on it, we can talk about the geometry of light and sonotropism and phototropism and pulling the light out of the seed, pulling the life out of the earth into the seed, into the silica-rich, glass, fibrous type of antenna. I like talking about. Go ahead.
A concept of why plants show phi spirals in their growth systems. Now, this is so Brachistochrone curvature was discovered by Joanne Bermolii, and it was used to consider the trajectory of a light in the medium where the speed of light increases following a constant vertical acceleration, and it creates this dip, that of gravity. But it's saying that, as it's in the group chat, if you want to go to the group chat, there's a actual GIF.
Yes.
Yeah, very bottom, and it shows what Brachistochrone curvature is.
Yes, I haven't quite hopped into that just yet. We're going to get into Brachistochrone curvature.
Okay.
It might be okay. It might be right here. We can transition into it.
Okay. Well, there's this concept that I just wanted to share about this Brachistochrone curvature quickly, which is that, and also the vector field. If we exist in a vector field, say that it isn't particularly cubic, but it might be icosahedral or dodecahedral, like stacking magnets in an icosahedral fashion, there might be a Brachistochrone curvature that can carry on between, in a fluid fashion, between each component of that icosahedral tiling stacking. You can have a universe that is based on simple polyhedral building blocks, and curvature, the way light follows the path, would be the hyperbolic sets of those solids.
Yes.
That perhaps there is a universe is made out of solids, bubbles that breathe, and they have phi relations embedded in them, and that's the reason that plants or anything else in nature is phi induced, because it's first based on, from a subatomic scale, the way that light changes its curvature is based on a vector field or a grid that is phi induced using golden polyhedra, like the hexacontahedron or the rhombic tricontahedron. These are all polyhedra that have a 1:phi ratio based in all rhomboidal faces. And each of those faces can have a dip that shows Brachistochrone curvature. I've actually been working on a project with Penrose tiling, still working on it for quite a while, to show Brachistochrone curvature and this concept that light is icosahedral, and shows Brachistochrone curvature, that there's a connection where the vector field is solid, that perhaps our universe is made out of actual building blocks and not just infinitely intangible and can have curvature anywhere, but that the curvature is based on certain vectors and building blocks from the fundamentals.
I think what you're talking about is true, and I believe that I've mapped it out successfully and correctly with the images that I showed at the beginning of the program. There's many ways to probably map it out, but the way that I happened to stumble upon it was I'm trying to pull up other images to try to find a still image. I'll get to it later in the episode, but let me share my camera here. Stop sharing screen, and talk about what the Brachistochrone curvature is and why it's important. I'm gonna video right here. You guys can see me, right?
Yep.
Okay. So the images that what Brighton showed and what I was sharing, if you see that the balls were coming down and going to the point, from one point to another, this idea is archaic, and the idea of what's the fastest possible
way of light to travel.
What's the fastest possible way to get from one point to another? So anything, including light. And there's different, some people would say a straight line, some people would say a curved line, some people would say a spiral line, so the math is done, and the math is Brachistochrone curvature. And
with gravity, it's with gravity. Without gravity, it would be a straight line. With gravity, the ball travels fastest to its path through the Brachistochrone curvature instead of a straight line. But it's only due to an implemented force. So the greater the force, the deeper the Brachistochrone curvature.
Okay, so it changes. Yeah, it flexes. So it has to be a flexible field, a field that allows for flex, and that operation has to be scalable or invariant, where it is allowed to change operations from one place and go to the other without changing its form, but changing its size. Stay the same whilst changing size. Invariant. Now, I showed this before. You can clearly see the curvatures on here. And the curvatures are the Brachistochrone curvature. But you have both chiralities of the Brachistochrone curvature. And you can see it from the side view there. And this would be an east or a west gate looking at it, because you have 3 gates to the north, 3 to the east, 3 to the south, and 3 to the west. And this would be one gate, and the opening up of one gate allows you to see the Brachistochrone curvature is fundamental at the smallest scale. First principle fundamental geometries, you can see that they start to form on the first wavelet that comes off of the center. So this is all based off of the first wavelet. Now the Brachistochrone is not cyclical, so it's not part of an arc of a circle. It's not part of one of these circles, but it happens to be in between this perfectly as it secretes itself into a pine cone like shape at the base and the rim. So if I were to highlight this whole field and color the whole field, you'll have what I'll show you later as the image, and you can see that there's a way to get in and a way to get out, and the phyllotaxis of the spiraling arrangement of trees and leaves is due to the packing of this sphere packing system. And this is a quasi crystal. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But it represents higher dimensional rotations and geometries of higher dimensional space. So this is solid information in a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, and 5-dimensional type of geometries that are happening. And all the information is still transcribed, and this is the same exact thing, but turning the spheres into vortices. And we'll look at it the same way. And you can see with the geometries there is that pinching type of effect that adds to the vortexture. You have the tips of the wings actually being the conductors of vorticity in the opening and closing of layers, multiple dimensional hierarchical stacking layers, which are Hopf fibrations and torsion for twistors. So you've seen it on that scale, you've seen it on this scale. Now this is the same exact thing, but I've highlighted a bunch more inside the Dougherty network, and this is the square root 2 Dougherty network. And you can also see real good the green and the pink vortices that show the Brachistochrone curvature to follow these are quaternion braids. The Brachistochrone curvature follows these quaternion braids, and that's how cellular division is broken, and how cellular division happens is because of these quaternion braids. So for light to follow along the same paths makes perfect sense. And I haven't even studied too deep into the interactions between these petals and this pine coning type of shape, but it interacts on each level differently, the Brachistochrone curvature, with different spheres and spherical systems highlighted, because each one of these describe nested systems that are dependent on each other, like the hare that they were showing, the bunny, the rabbit, and the wolf population. They're locked in a chain link like this. This whole thing is the food system, the food chain, and it's a chain, and they're all chained, and you can't have some without the others, and they're dependent on each other. So it's important to have strong apex predators to tighten up the population, and to also allow for diversification. It's kind of weird, but that's what nature builds towards. And light builds on this grid. And I'd love to see Brighton's modeling of the the Brachistochrone curvature too. But I don't hear enough people talking about it.
Well, actually, it's still a work in progress.
Yeah. Whenever you're ready to release it. But so that's a little bit about the Brachistochrone curvature. We have quite a bit to get into, and as I said, we're going to get into the exponentials. Twistors are exponential, and twistors are derived off of Maxwell's equations. So that's super important. When we find maths that are working, but Roger Penrose couldn't figure it out. But I think as a universe, as a team, as a collective, as YouTubers here, please feel free to ask questions below. But as YouTubers, we can figure this out. We can make this make sense. And there's a good platform here with the Dougherty set and the Dougherty Networks that are showing how Hopf Fibrations nest and become these dream catchers, the spider webs. I guess spiders, they just discovered that spider webs pull the silk out of their brain, which that doesn't make sense to me.
Can we talk about angular momentum for a minute really quick? Because I think that it's like super important. Are you guys familiar with angular momentum, orbital angular momentum? What these? So I'm just gonna wiki read it so that we're all like, the angular momentum of light is a vector quantity that expresses the amount of dynamical rotation present in the electromagnetic field of the light. When traveling approximately in a straight line, a beam of light can also be rotating or spinning, twisting around its own axis. This rotation, while not visible to the naked eye, can be revealed by the interaction of a light beam with matter. Okay, there are two distant forms of rotation of a light beam, one involving its polarization and the other its wavefront shape. These two forms of rotation are therefore associated with the two distinct forms of angular momentum, respectively named light spin angular momentum, SAM, or light orbital angular momentum, OAM. Okay, the total angular momentum of light, or more generally the electromagnetic field and other force fields and matter, is conserved in time. And I think that this is a big deal because we're talking about we're talking about the vector of like what that specific vector quality and the amount of force on that or out of that vector it takes to cause what type of spin, what force of spin, what direction of spin. And so this is and is light a particle or is it a wave, right? Or is it a particle acting in a wave? Is it a wave that is contained? So what is the light exactly? And I think that like kind of digging down into angular momentum and why this occurs and what the repercussions of this and how this affects light, because it's like one is a polarization, right, and can be flip-flop changed, but one isn't. And when we take light and light reflects or refracts back off of a surface, depending on the angle at which it comes, that's going to depend on the quality of return that comes back and to what direction that spins, the polarity of that spin, and how we can control it. And that's why metamaterials are so effective, and the formation of metamaterials, because they take these waves, they take these orbitals, and they direct them in the exact direction and destination point necessary for the desired effect. And so if we want to understand how these really work and what's really going on, we need to understand what the effect of that angular momentum is and why that changes according to matter and light and time.
Yes, which would mean the vortex, the spin down the vortex, how tight it becomes, which I believe is referred to optimal translation of vorticity, or the translation of vorticity. When you're spinning, when things are spinning, it is what creates the charge. Spin creates charge, creates gravitational field.
So can you check out a pitchfork hologram? Can you bring up a pitchfork hologram with an OAM so we can look at that?
Yeah.
And if I might add in what the topic is right now, if I might add the fact, you got to think about the color variations. Each color spectrum, each color variation has its own angular momentum. So if you're, if you have light that's coming through yellow, it's going to take on a different angle. And this is how different they should talk about the wolves and everything. Everything is created through light variances. And as it goes through each one of these, it causes a different angular momentum and then cause, different vortices spiraling, however you want to look at it, nesting, But it all attaches to, like you got drawn out in that, one of the first diagrams you have, buddy, is it all looks like a vertebrae, and you look at our spinal fluid and how it carries basically the lifeblood of the honey oil from the melatonin and stuff. But once we can figure out the combinations of light, like the 12 stones, it always comes back to these 12 stones of the New Jerusalem Church and the sardonyx and the way the stripes, clean our wounds. And if we start understanding that, the sequence of these, we can understand what we're about ready to create. Either it's going to be dissonant or it's going to be harmonic, whether it's going to be yellow, orange, red, blue, purple. These are the things where I'm right now. This is where all my meditations and all my research is going, is how to find the balanced combination that gets you to the, the proposed outcome, whether you want a bug, whether you want a beetle, whether you want a bat. I just wanted to add that in there, that each light has its own angle, like 108 or 33, 78.
Well, check this out. You can't just create a bug, because it has to have higher dimensional fields that are nested, that are feeding off of each other. There has to have. Thank you.
Yeah, well, yeah, but as they break down and fractalize, that's how you end up with materialized matter. But it starts in an energy that is beyond matter in the first place, is all I'm getting at. And once we can start understanding how it breaks down through the color sequences, then you can add the right color sequences and or the things that'll get you those desired results. And there's always got to be life involved. If there's not, the resonance of life, obviously you will not have life.
This image right here that you have pulled up is absolutely gorgeous. And it makes a statement that light, the traveling light, has that spin. Could you go back to the green image? has that spin, but it's also sectioned inside of a bicone.
Yes,
Goes
just
around
like
this sphere, and then
Trayon rays.
the waves would be wider and less and more spread out if they were radio waves, microwaves, and as we begin to go into infrared visible light rays or X-rays, the spinning would become tighter along that section, along that pipe. Angular
Someone mute their mic.
momentum.
There's some background noise. Keep going,
Chad,
right?
you got a mic mute. Okay.
That's all right. Go ahead.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. So in this image, we can imagine this as light, and that the spinning is the angular momentum going along the latitudinal field, and the longitudinal field is where the spinning is occurring. Now, radio waves would have wider gaps between each time that it goes around the bicone, the green bicone there, hyperbolic bicone. Now, microwaves would have a tighter spiral than radio waves would. Infrared would be even tighter. Visible light would be tighter. There would be a tighter spinning, so that and then we go on to X-rays and so forth. Ultraviolet, it becomes even tighter and tighter, and we'll have multiple of these sections. But the thing is, light never moves. What's happening is there's energy, the quality of energy that is interacting, saying, I am here, and then it's moving. It's
depending on what color of light that's fading through. Yes, exactly.
It's like Conway's Game of Life. If you've ever heard of Conway's Game of Life, we have these squares that light up as quality. I am on. I am alive. I'm on. I'm white.
Yeah.
And that's what the square does. It turns on. But then that quality of being alive, depending upon certain interactions, will turn off, and it will turn on the next, the neighbor. It's a neighbor square.
Yes.
Well, in this example, it's more of a continuous flow, or something to do with a field, a vector field. But there is,
and it has to do with hot and warm and cold colors, because warm induces a cold color. You got the rarefaction, which cools. Then you've got the, again, the compression, and it goes along the same lines, and according to what light it goes to. But you're absolutely right with that.
Well, that's where it all comes from, is thermodynamics. The coupling,
and that's why it's important that kids know the color wheel. How we know the spiraling of it. How we, these are very. When we understand this, we'll understand that magenta is a mix of a blend on the periodic timetables that will lead to a hostile color intent, because it's disharmonic in its value. It's like an inversion in a stall pattern. So it's like, you want to move, but you don't know where. You know what I mean? It's, I'm saying there's a certain colors that cause a staticness, a almost an agitation, simply because they're holding too long. And once we get this down and we teach this, we can have much more harmonious interaction in our world.
The concept I want to pull up here with this bipyramid is that the energy pushing through it.
Did you steal the screen?
The bipyramid itself doesn't move. No, you still have the screen, buddy.
Oh, I thought you were showing
with your image that's right up there right now on the screen. Yes, the bipyramid, our universe is filled with these bipyramids everywhere.
Watch Frozen 2.
But most of them right now are closed. They're a straight line. They haven't extended outwards circularly from the center. It's not radiative. It's not gyroscopic yet. It's stagnant. It's a gyro.
Light.
And those bipyramids never move. the only thing that moves is the quality of energy. And it moves from one to the next cell, to the next cell, to the next cell, as a quality. But the pyramids, the bipyramids, the universe that the universe is made out of in this vector field never move. And so that's the concept that we live inside of a cellular automaton, and how principle of light can be transferred to this concept.
Yes, we've talked about this in quite a few different episodes. I want to see someone map the cellular automaton field using something else like spheres or hyperbolic geometry, so we can see what it does or even using the Dougherty networks. Turn one sphere on after you turn another one on, and that's probably similar to what's going on. But there is a preponderance of spin and chirality inside of all systems. Inside of every single system, there has to be a preponderance to create the dipolarity of the spin of any type of galaxy or anything. That's how charge reduces itself, by taking off its loads of charge by dissipating it into galactic structures. You got to think of it as a gigantic filament, and the filament needs to cool down and it needs to heat up. The only thing happening here is compression and rarefaction, and that's why we get divergence and curl and
alternating current. That's also the reason for alternating current.
And this is what Walter Russell talks about, and this is the facts here. The only thing happening, how Maxwell came to his conclusions and his equations, is working off of the. He was working directly with Kelvin, and Kelvin was the guy who did the Fahrenheit, or the one of the scales, the Kelvin scale for measurement. So this was about temperature and Fahrenheit, and how all things get cold. All things that are cold tend to get warm, and all things that are warm tend to get cold to a neutral center. And the neutral center is what we're talking about here. And here's a perfect image of it. A neutral center. You know, whether you're in the hot direction, you're tending towards the blue. And when you're
it's also to do with the angle of the way that the light this is to do with the angle of the angle of light, because some is a convex, if it's a convex or if it's a concave angle, is it separating or is it combining the beams and that is
whether it's warm or cold. Absolutely. And they can tell whether the star is coming at you or going away from you.
Well, I think that, warm or cold is relative. Like we could talk about, like, temperature is kind of like, let's just break it down. Are we talking about like temperature of the light, or are we talking about temperature of the light, which would be like, is it toward the cold or cool spectrum, or is it toward, like, is that light actually generating some sort of heat or temperature difference in the surrounding area? Because these are two different factors of the same equation that should be addressed separately. To really understand how what is going on here, because some light heats, some light actually produces a thermal.
I see that one image right in the middle is that diagram.
The light doesn't.
I think what whilst describing what thermodynamics is, you're understanding what light is, because that's. If you get a firm understanding of what heat is in thermodynamics and that type of system, flowing system, and vortex dynamics, a solid understanding of those two is how Maxwell derived his equations. So you see that they're one and the same. You have the curl and the divergent inside of the toroidal systems that were studied. And if you look at his books directly, you'll see. Show them up. I'll pull it up here.
Make sure to pull that drawing back up again, will you? Because that's a perfect diagram to explain the serpent eating its tail, and the unfolding there. And those two little water droplets there. That's some awesome stuff.
Oh, I'll go back to that. We're gonna play that video.
Yeah.
Video. Now,
I have to go for a moment. I got to charge my phone and set off to the store. I'll be back in a short. See you folks in a minute.
Awesome. Sounds good, brother. So this right here, look at that. Divergence and curl. This is Maxwell's equations. He is the geometer. He did the geometry of it. That's what he did. He did and he shows that one system eating and feeding into another system is how the waves move through dipoles, through convergent and divergent lenses and fields with preponderant charges moving in one direction or current charges moving in one direction and flows. So by studying this geometry, you start to understand, whoa, dude, wait, electricity, the father of electricity and electromagnetism was a geometer, and he found it all out based off of just curl and divergence. That blows my mind. That should blow anybody's mind. And you got the Van Allen belts right here. Here's the Earth. Here's the Van Allen belts. Here's the auroras coming in at the northern Aurora Borealis, Aurora Australis. You got everything here. And it's very simply laid out. And I just wanted everybody to look and see for yourself that, dude, it's this. This is it. And these are cyclical. These are cycloids. These are it's helical. It is helicoidal. It is pine coning. It is the pine cone. It is what geometry. It is what geometry is, and what light is geometry. What is geometry? Geometry is all sorts of things, but fundamentally, geometry is more fundamental than what we're even describing. There's more fundamental geometries than this, than what he's describing this as, is what I'm saying.
Buddy, would you like a perspective of a person who, I actually took the calculus classes and the electrical engineering classes, these equations. Divergence and curl are really important. I want to downplay the photon model for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. But what I do want to say is that I think the major key that people should think about is not to get stuck into relative viewpoints of hot and cold, or this is a sink, this is an energy giver, which is important, but that what we're really describing is a geometric field of concentrations and dilutions. The equations describing magnetic flux are, like photons, ultimately a model that can be used to create, say, a transformer. But we don't really have any proof that the magnetism itself is, without moving a physical object, that the magnets themselves are actually moving. People get stuck on the lines and drawing arrows along the lines. That's the same trap that the general relativity people get stuck in when they bend an arbitrary direction of space-time and call it a fabric. Mm-hmm. The real issue is that what is a field? A field is a relationship between different things in the field. Usually you describe that in polarity, in terms of positives and negative poles. But it could be all sorts of kinds of objects, or, if you want, constructs that are in a relational field, and the so-called chemistry between them is related through these geometric forms that you're talking about. The divergence and curl are merely derivations of those relationships to describe the equivalent of the amount of acceleration and velocity at any point in that field,
Yes.
towards or away from
Yes.
the construct, whether it's a physical object or a mental construct or a social dynamic. It doesn't really much matter. The big issue, I think, is when talking about light, what is the basic fundamental cosmology underneath? And in my opinion, we have to get away from the general relativity view, which, of course, everybody here already knows doesn't fit the Big Bang view anyways, but they've kind of melded them into one thing, and it's confused people as to the nature of what matter and energy are, and has led away from a discussion of a probably more thorough understanding. The gentleman mentioned the energy that comes before matter. That's what all of the ancient societies describe, that energy comes before matter.
Yeah.
So in my estimation, the entire universe is full of these magnetic constructions, and then energy is flowing along these you could say vector fields, and the rate of their flow is dependent upon the divergence and curl, but it's because of the concentrations and dilutions. And what's important, though, is as the flow happens, there's induction happening, and that rearranges the magnetic structure. But the structure of the magnetism itself doesn't need to flow. It just needs to exist in a constantly rearranging pattern.
Mhm.
And that's what actually the satellites have shown. Of course, they were using everybody's favorite magnetohydrodynamics, but it's still measurements taken out in space just around the Earth. It's constantly rippling. Those are the MMS. Those are the MMS satellite results, and the simulations that they did from those are pretty reliable. And it looks just like water rippling in a pond, but in this case, a three-dimensional complete rippling all around. And they're describing disconnections and reconnections, but that's not accurate. All that it is different levels of concentration and dilutions, and those concentrations and dilutions are altering the divergence and curl, and ultimately the flux, and then the particles are moving along that and generating the electric phenomenon. It's all one force, but
and they become bundles.
It's expressed in different ways.
I think
Do you have some imagery for us that we could search up and
go to the quickest way to find that is you go to the what was that plasmaeducation.net. No space, just plasmaeducation.net. Hopefully I left that site, that URL working. I did cancel some stuff. Plasmaeducation.net.
Plasma Coalition.
Plasmaeducation.net.
I'm bad.
The only thing I have to say in regards to this, what you're describing right now is, like, I know everybody wants to get down on quantum theory or whatever, but what you're describing actually can be explained via an OAM change from a temperature exchange, much as we see when we look down a hot road and we see the air moving, we see the mirage of a wave in front of us. I mean, this is how temperature can bend our perception of light. And so I don't necessarily take what this is as a solid confirmation of explanation, because there's too many other factors that could be like, well, what about this? When this happens,
hey, buddy,
I have a really hard time with the way we're
Heather,
testing the visual information that's coming into it.
Can I just say one thing that you made me think? Sorry. When you were talking, it made me think the oasis in the waves of heat. And if you think about it, dude, when you're over a fire and you're trying to talk to someone, you can't hear them through the heat waves. You can't. And there all sorts of stuff is skewed from the heat. So heat could be responsible, just heat inside of tubes or cylindrical tubes could be responsible for mirroring and lensing that we're seeing in the cosmos.
Well, even does it have to be? Does it could it be? Does it have to be heat specific? Could it be temperature variant depending on the type of matter that it is? Like when we look at Pollux water, easy water, and we look at his tubes, we look at a swimming pool, right, of like regular room temperature water that still has the shadows of these tubes occurring, even though the water isn't hot or cold, or it's in a liquid state. I mean, does this vary per the state of the atomic state or molecular state of the substance in that temperature? And then how does that affect how that substance is going to react to the light and what we get back from that?
I hate to be that guy, but when you say temperature, it's basically just a distraction from the central point of electromagnetism, because that's what temperature is. Temperature is a measure of the energetic state, ultimately the electromagnetic state. In every interaction you have with it, see it, interpret it, measure it, everything is still relying upon the electromagnetic spectrum. So it just goes right
everything back in that spectrum is going to be relative to everything else in that relative field, just like you were describing before. So if one thing is way far away in a different field and its quote temperature field is different than the temperature field at which it is being observed, then there's going to be a variance in the observation between the two. Like there's going to be something happening in that space as the temperature changes, interacts differently, and the observation point views it through that space, through that material. That's all going to react to light differently. And that's going to send and transmit that light differently.
Because it was requested, I posted the relevant NASA measurements there. If you look in the chat,
thank you.
There's a GIF, but there's also if you go there, the original article was linked to, so you can see it. The concentrations, the quote reconnections, the interactions, and how each interaction is creating another interaction. It's exactly what you see in the plasma behavior on the surface of the sun. It's what you see in water. It's when you look at weather at a significant enough speed, of course, it's how the clouds are moving. I think I've even noticed it basically in the movements of ants and humans. But the point is relational field dynamics. And each change induces a new structure, and then that new structure is an underlying change in the old one. Plus, you have the hysteresis, which is the memory of the system as to what the previous setup was, and there's a lag. Yes. So you have also that lag, and there may be an interaction between those two at the next level of discovery for us to somehow see the future and the past connecting together. I don't know. It's beyond me. But the concentrations and dilutions of energy appear to be the real key to all of it. It has nothing to do with the bending of space-time. It's that different concentrations and dilutions are happening all the time, and the constant movement of them is observable in our daily lives, and it's observable in the cosmos. It's observable on every level in every science field. Just no one's talking about it for whatever reason.
Well, what it's called is emergence. Everything is emerging, and emergence is never stopping. It's always happening. And we like to talk about the death of things. We're a death culture, and even the power that death brings, with being able to pray and sing to your eternal ancestors. But nonetheless, these are hierarchical structures. And when you were talking about this is the bridge to space weather, is the bridge to be able to see the future and the past connect during the present. Wow. Damn.
Those are some beautiful bubbles.
That just blew my mind. That came out about 3 or 4 years ago, I think.
It allows for new creatures to constantly come into existence And then over here, once we get out here, it's going to start talking about, or at least the images that my mind thinks about. Where was it? Those Hisslers, Hissler waves.
Can I just interject? I love it when you blow your own mind. It's my favorite fucking part. Every time.
Dude, this is so cool because, you know, when we go through a catastrophic event, the memory stays outside of the system for the system, once it gets back into coherence, to form that network again, and thus it creates speciation, rapid speciation, and a whole bunch of systems emerge that are already in the Van Allen belts from the sun, and that are already in this, because the sun has its own Van Allen belts, I'm sure, as the Earth has its own Van Allen belts. So there should be Hisslers, Whistlers, and different types of waves and waveforms that are inside of the sun too, that are making sounds, just like there are inside of our auroras. Does the sun have auroras? I figured Ramon
Sorry, you're asking me if the sun has an aurora?
Yeah, does the sun
I mean, like a borealis like we have?
something similar, yeah.
You know, I'm not sure if it has the same shape, but you know, it's such a powerful object that it may, for the fact that we can't get too close to it, it may be difficult for us to see because most of the particles may be thrown off, and the amount of spectra that you're talking about may be too small. But as the auroras are caused by an influx of particles, I would imagine so. I wish it was conveniently visible, because then we would see the connections from the higher structure. And as regards to in my opinion, the best evidence, not just of the cosmic rearrangement, but of the interconnection at each level. I have an entire table devoted to this. At each level, from the microbiological level to our level, to the planet size level, to the solar system size level, and on up, there's an increase in two things. One is the current, and of course the voltage levels, but that's to be expected as you have more material. But the current density is a lot stronger. And then secondly, the velocity. And you would think, because of how our brains work, we see the galaxy as slow moving, but actually, as fast as we're going around the sun is going even faster around the Milky Way. And believe it or not, the Milky Way is going exponentially faster through the supercluster. And that appears to hold true all the way up and down. So you get the relativity of perspective of time, and I don't know if we're in the middle. For us, everything appears to be in the middle or neutral or ground. But certainly the way that material experiences time changes on scale, and it so happens that the scale of current is also totally related. And that tells me that it really is still going back to that thermodynamic idea of energy concentration. It's really an issue of it's a
Background noise.
that it's really a huge issue of the gradient that is created between two different concentrations. So like a Stirling engine, the reason the Stirling engine works is because you have a high temperature relative to us, of course, high temperature on one plate and a cold temperature, low temperature on the other plate, and creates a gradient for energy exchange. And that interacts with the gas inside. And of course, gas laws being what they are, the gas will expand and contract, and that moves the piston. And for most people, that looks like magic because there's no battery and there's no steam going through a turbine. It's pure transfer of thermal energy into mechanical energy without an in-between state. And we're not used to that. We're used to having to push something mechanical along. But in this case, the gradient alone creates the actual exchange. The problem for the Stirling engine, of course, is that the energy, as you guys talked about, wants to equalize and to become equivalent through the gas chamber of the piston, and that kills the mechanism, of course. But if we find ways to eliminate that threat, and we can keep one plate hot and one plate cold, then essentially it's free energy. And it's the only, by the way, other than you could say photovoltaics, which are unfortunately toxic, the Stirling engine's the only free energy I've ever seen in terms of real, true, free energy. And it's a fantastic technology from out of the 1800s, but it works purely on the gradient. And gradient is all about furl and divergence.
What is the model that you said works called?
It's called a Stirling engine with an I.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, you were still commenting on that toward the tail end as well. Okay.
Yeah.
I
assume that you know what I'm talking about, the Stirling engine.
Yeah. I know the Stirling engine.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Is there an engine that works like this?
Is there a what that looks like that?
An engine that we could develop that works like this with these,
like a Taurus?
With those Van Allen radiation belt type of power source.
But it's a big universe. I assume that some very intelligent species out there has figured it out, and maybe we've had people figure it out too.
I love your mug.
Thank you. But at the same time, I haven't figured that out yet. I did watch a video earlier. A man had modified his engines. He may have died, unfortunately, but he had modified his motors, and he had changed the shape of his stators in order to reduce the amount of eddy curl and increase the efficiency in his motors. And he was able to do some self-start, and it was great video. I really enjoyed it. He was quite professional engineer, retired. He's kind of like a Donald Scott kind of guy.
Yeah.
To it.
And there's a lot of guys just like that. And then unfortunately, they disappear with their secrets, And so, he had a GoFundMe account, but someone commented in the GoFundMe that he had died. So I don't know what happened. I don't know his patent numbers or anything. We'll just have to, dig into it. Yeah, I know. But the video, I posted it in the thread before you started your calls and stuff. I'm pretty sure I shared it. If not, I'll find it and share it again.
Okay.
But
that's a spacecraft. New discoveries of bubbles. Is that the link you're talking about? The bubbles in space.
Well, it's talking about a guy learns the secrets of Tesla, amplifies by 5,000%. And it sounds, the title sounds really, it sounds really cheesy. Well, it actually gets kind of loud at some points, but it's not a free energy video. It's just a video that shows that some of our thinking about the way that we interact and move with electromagnetism is still stuck in a materialistic sense in terms of that we need to push, pull, and burn and use up. And he's describing eliminating those uses because he's undergoing that kind of evolution. But it may be that we have some kind of biological limitation that we have to overcome. I don't know. I don't know the answers to those questions.
Has anyone else experienced the cosmological serpent experience, the rainbow serpent, the Aboriginal creation mythology beginning? All around the globe, there is this serpent that's carried in mythology. You take a look at Hindu mythology, Aboriginal mythology, ancient Sumerian, Egyptian. They have Ka. Actually, the Sumerians and the Egyptians both used Ka. The Greeks, on the Caduceus, the two serpents, again, Has anyone experienced this serpent?
I have experienced it directly.
It's your Kundalini.
At Kundalini. I've experienced it not just in Kundalini form, in other forms as well. I think
Right.
it's the same energy that gives all visceral experiences.
Well, Kundalini, if I could share a little concept here that a lot of people are unfamiliar with, is that choroidal plexus centers. You're having fluid, there's cerebral spinal fluid in your spine, and you have these things called choroidal plexus centers that secrete cerebral spinal fluid, and you have nerve clusters, which are clusters of nerves, and they're usually in high density concentration spots like between your adrenals. There's one in your neck, a nerve plexus center, and these centers are very sensitive. Now, it's called a choroidal plexus center, choroidal.
How do you spell that?
Chroidal, I believe. It should come up underneath that, probably. And when you're inducing DMT in your pineal gland, okay, starting from the rock bottom. So this stem here, the brain stem, has cerebral spinal fluid that moves up and down it. And near the pons, actually underneath the cerebellum, you'll have a choroidal plexus center. It's not actually shown here, but it secretes cerebral spinal fluid. You also have one in your fornix, which is where the eye of Horus is shown. And the pineal gland is right up in there, next to the fornix. So
there it is. Choroid plexus.
Yeah. This fluid starts to build up, and it creates pressure in your spine. And when you're meditating, you're in an inductive state, you start to create an astronomical amount of this cerebral spinal fluid. So a lot of pressure builds up, and as that pressure builds up, it starts applying its pressure to your spine, and that's why you start to feel it first in your root chakra, because it's at the base of your spine where the gravitation is at its base. And so you'll feel pressure in your nerves. That's nerve flaring, and that's why it kind of feels like it's moving serpent-like, or there's something wild going on. That's the upwards and downwards movement of the cerebral spinal fluid, because it's moving. And so the pressure keeps building as it's being secreted from your choroidal plexus centers, cerebral spinal fluid, into your spinal cord, and it keeps building and building, and then it moves up to your next chakra center, which is actually not an energy center, but it's rather a nerve cluster. And it will keep moving up nerve clusters in your spine until it reaches your head. And when it reaches your head, something phenomenal happens. This pressure buildup secretes DMT, because the pineal gland can have pressure applied to it, and it has these things called octahedral calcite crystals and pineus lights. Now, the pineal gland is a literal eye rod. It can see. It can see. When pressure is applied to octahedral calcite crystals that are secreted from the pineal gland, when pressure is applied to them, they're piezoluminescent, meaning that they create light. Now, the pressure that's applied to those octahedral calcite crystals in your brain when they're secreted from the pineal gland is created, that pressure is created from the cerebral spinal fluid when it reaches your head. And the pineus lights also have pressure applied to them, and when they're secreted, they're piezoelectric. So they create sound when they have pressure applied to them. And that's where that Tibetan singing bowl sound comes from. Dong, that ringing in your ears and your head.
And where bells come from. All bells come from Tibet.
Yeah. It's about inducing the state. Actually, in Tibet, they were studying how to induce that state and how to try to induce the subconscious into moving into that state, or trick it into, oh, this vibration means that the pineal lights are secreting. The fascinating thing about this is that when you sleep, during the day, your cerebral spinal fluid does not drain, does not clear. But when you sleep, pardon me, it does, but not in your head. So your brain, when you're walking around during the day, cerebral spinal fluid doesn't flow through your cranial cavity in intense quantities. But when you're asleep and you lie down and you go into deep REM sleep or delta and theta mind wave states, you induce cerebral spinal fluid cleansing in the cranial cavity. So a lot of cerebral spinal fluid will be rushing into your cranial cavity. And the thing about this is, where do dreams come from? The thought about this is that perhaps dreams are induced by this secretion of cerebral spinal fluid applying to the pineal gland, thus secreting octahedral calcite crystals, creating light, thus secreting pineocytes, and applying pressure to them, causing sound, and thus having your pineal gland, which is a literal eye rod, seeing light from the octahedral calcite crystals, creates this dream world. There are quite a few occult symbols that make statement to the pineal gland being the source of the astrological realm. The pineal gland being where dreams are created from. Now, Kundalini.
So catching them with a dream catcher in the same shape as the pine coning type of shape that I've been shown that's in the Dougherty Network and in Native American dream catchers makes a lot of sense here to inject.
Yeah, there might be something to that. Most definitely. When we get strong in these experiences, we start to see geometry. MEO5 DMT brings about this. So, bringing it back, the pineal gland, when you're in darkness, it starts to produce melatonin. When you're in light, it produces serotonin. Melatonin turns into serotonin. Well, not exactly in that way, but you don't produce melatonin when you're in light. When you're in darkness, you produce melatonin. And when you're in darkness for a prolonged period of time and produce about 25 to 30 milligrams of melatonin in the pineal gland, that melatonin transforms into MEO5 DMT. And then after you produce 20 to 25 milligrams of MEO5 DMT in the pineal gland, it starts to transform into NN-DMT, which is the pure DMT. And this synthesis can take up to 5-6 days in darkness. But if you're surrounding yourself with natural electromagnetic frequencies, such as a solar flare frequencies or candlelight around the head, it can raise the speed in which this happens. If you reach certain meditative states, it can raise the speed in which this process, the synthesis happens from melatonin to an NDMT.
There's a sound. So there's a sound to it, right?
A sound? Yes. That would be the piezoelectric properties of pineocytes.
So that sound, I'm putting together a team of researchers, and I'm leading a team. I've been given an opportunity, and it's going to be around sonobiology and sonotropism and electrosonics. But if you play that sound of a dreamer who's an affluent healer or something like that, or just play those higher vibration sounds to an unhealthy mind, I propose that it will fix the mind of the unhealthy person by listening to healthy mind waves.
You're probably right, because it's a sympathetic resonance.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the trick is, the trick is to have the resonance that's healthy be the one that's sympathized, the one that's replicated, and not vice versa, which tends to be the natural case. So that's another thing, that question we can ask is, why is one more predominantly sympathetic than the other, and why is it not tend to not be the positive one, and how do we mitigate that?
I can answer that pretty succinctly. There is a discussion in Mahayana about what are called the 10 worlds. The lower 6 worlds are the common experience, and the upper 4 are spiritual experiences. The lowest 4 are the 4 types of hells, and then the middle 2 are fleeting states of tranquility and joy, which they call heaven. This is an ancient Mahayana model. It goes back thousands. Yeah. And I'm not going to go deeply Mahayana. So the point being, though, that each of the levels, as you scale from 1 towards 10, 10 being the Buddha level, actually requires an exponential amount more of energy. So again, when you get to the 9th level, there's a strong slope backwards. And to model this, personally, I like to use the E equals MC squared model, because the Buddha state approaches the asymptote, but of course, being still contained in a physical body, you don't cross that until the parinirvana state. So the asymptote represents the crossing over into a bodiless form. But you can always go further and further up the scale if you could generate the energy to do it. You could look at it in discrete consciousness as well, but it's convenient to use the E equals MC squared curve, because you can see the tendency of energy to roll down the hill back towards the lower 4 states, because each next state contains more energy than the previous ones combined. So there's a tendency of energy to want to again roll down and towards the other. Of course, you could just get philosophical and say that the universe runs on misery, which there's a lot of evidence. So
plenty of evidence for that. I had a bit of an epiphany.
That's the simple way.
In Egyptian pyramids were it's a mystery to understand how they saw inside the pyramids when they were building them. And there's no soot on any of the ceilings that they originally discovered when they opened the tombs, or quote unquote tombs. But these these giant boxes that they found all over are granite. And the mechanism that you described in the pineal gland that allows light to stimulate dreams is the same mechanism, I believe, that is thought to be what lit the inside of the pyramids, which was the pressure that's put on granite creates a glowing light. And so the pyramids were naturally lit from within without the use of combustion or fire of any kind, because of the exact same mechanism. And so I think it's an amazing connection. I don't know if it resonates with you guys, but that's all I could think about when I was hearing you talk about the metallic and magnetic stimulus that exists within the light receptors in the pineal gland being likely the same mechanism that was used to light the interior of the pyramids. It's an interesting thought.
I've actually looked into some models that suggest the pyramids are based on the anatomy of an eye rod. And that's interesting.
That's exactly what I'm pointing to. Yeah.
Wow, that's great.
The eye of Ra is
Yeah,
literally,
and
you know,
the King's
yeah.
Chamber shows where light is coming in, like a rainbow almost.
That's very.
So that's a
I mean,
pretty powerful connection.
52 degrees of the angle of a rainbow too. You know, and the
I've got some Tibetan singing bowls here to play as a quick audio to just listen in and get in one of those Zen states.
everybody mute your mics. Let's do this. I love that. Thank you.
These kind of sounds are induced at a secretion of pineal in the pineal gland. During meditative experience, you create a pressure buildup from the cerebral spinal fluid inside of your brain, your cranial cavity. And this pressure applies to the pineal gland, secretes the pineocytes. The pineocytes then have pressure applied to them from the cerebral spinal fluid, and it induces a sound, a resonance, a connection to the astrological. There is, when you secrete MeO5, comatose patients that stay in hospitals for prolonged periods of time, they come out of their comatose and say, I've seen God, or they come with profound revelations of their experiences and testimonies in their dream states. This is to say, perhaps their connection to God is induced from an MeO5 DMT experience, synthesized in the pineal gland from prolonged sleep state and deep sleep state. Because MeO5 brings everything you've ever experienced, every sensation, touch, smell, hearing, everything, and it turns it into one concrete synesthesic sense. Everything you could ever experience in the universe is at one, and everything that will ever be is at one. And in this state, there is no explaining anything. Everything is the same. But moving on to DMT and NDMT, the pure synthesis, induces an astronomical explosion and mind break of geometry that is far beyond us, that we can't even begin to understand, because it is higher dimensional and it is far beyond us. There is this theory by Terence McKenna that apes ate mushrooms.
Stone ape hypothesis.
Yes, these mushrooms induce psychological experiences and psychedelic trips that allowed us to evolve and think deeper and grow. And when we take a look at the connections of what mankind sees as great traits and what apes would do differently on psychedelics than not on psychedelics. On psychedelics, they have a lack of fear. They're brave. They don't fear death. They're also very more leadership-like. They learn to use tools. And there's all these other things, these properties that we promote in our current civilization. Beyond this, Terence goes on to another theory that these mushrooms are like an antenna to a alien, higher dimensional radio wave frequency that's broadcasted throughout our universe. And only certain chemical compound compositions can collect these frequencies throughout the galaxy and bring them back into a harmony that people can eat, induce, and get in resonance with. When we take a look at mushrooms, we find that they are some of the longest living organisms in the entire world. That in order for plants to live, we need mushrooms because they break down a carbon into soil and allow plants to have life in order to grow. The concept that we evolved from mushrooms, or mammals are evolving from mushrooms, should I say even further, not just apes. In our pineal gland, we have the ability to create DMT and MEO5. Those are found in mushrooms. Mushrooms are the origin of that compound. What I'm stating here is that it's blatantly obvious we have evolved from mushrooms. We've grown a larger brain and pineal gland and
it's also in a lot of other plants.
Web.
The DMT and MDO5 or MEO5 or whatever is also in a lot of other plants and animals as they dream.
Yeah.
And we're not so dissimilar from other creatures. And that's a big point, is we're not so dissimilar from the experiences experientially from other animals.
Yeah,
you can see
the Chinese describe the root-like growth as the wood phase, and it's just one of the 5 phases described, of course, inspired by Jupiter, the shape of the pinnacle. But the phase of Mu, which is the growth of root-like patterns, is seen on every level. That doesn't necessarily support. I want to make the counterpoint. As an herbalist, I just want to say, a lot of those guys that purport those kinds of hypotheses, they also happen to be addicts. So there's a lot of evidence to support that our brains develop those different compounds and receptors because it's an advantage, and not necessarily because of the interaction with the compound, but it may be a coevolution, and that happens all the time. And there's no proof that the coevolution is a Darwinian coevolution, but it's probably some form of higher level consciousness. I don't know if people ever read the Harvard paper on the Gaia hypothesis, but essentially you're talking in fractal theory, emergent properties, and these emergent properties would necessitate for an advantage to have those kinds of receptors, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it came from those consumptions. It may or may not. And we have great mythic records that don't really state that, but there is some evidence about the Oracle of Delphi, but it's not like she was the progenitor of all mankind. So it's not something that we can prove at this time. What's more important is that the receptors are there.
There's this.
Can I just also throw in there though too that it isn't just humans who have those receptors, and it isn't just humans that seek out this type of alteration. So it isn't just addicts, human and humanity and us that's seeking this elseness in a different type of substance. animals do this too. There's a tree in Africa, if you guys ever watched, it's like my kid's favorite, but animals are beautiful people, and they wait for that tree to ripen, and then they go party underneath it, and it's a communal thing that these animals, interspecial party going on, and they wait for it. And so it's like, is it just something innately within us that wants to explore something else, and the availability of the thing to do that? I completely agree that there's, we're able to get to these places by ourselves, right? We don't necessarily need this extra push or whatever to do it, but at the same time, I mean, some illnesses, some injuries, some deficiencies, sometimes some things our bodies need to experience to either jumpstart that or supply us with something that's lacking because it's not environmentally available to us. And so we seek that out. And I don't necessarily think it's I've experienced both ways of this. I don't think you need it to get there, but I also think that some people it helps them to get there, or at least to see what they're looking for, right? Because if you don't know what you're looking for looks like, you don't know if you found it.
Well, that's perfect.
The group chat, there is a image of the anatomy of the pineal gland. If you want to put that up, please carry on.
You have to be interested in order to be interesting. And I don't know what you just said, Brighton, but we were both talking at the same time. Say it again.
In the group chat, there is an image of the pineal gland, the anatomy of the pineal gland. It's in the group chat. Should be near the bottom, up 2.
All right.
Right there, yeah.
Is this part above it?
Yeah, the purple part, everything highlighted in the purple. The blue is a field behind it I'm actually creating posters for these coming out soon. But this is anatomy of the pineal gland, and it's showing the geometric experience behind it, and the anatomy with that blue, the big orb in the center of the pineal gland there is the nucleus, and you'll have that tip, which is kind of squiggly at the top. There's a whole lot of holes in that tip. It kind of looks like a pine cone, but not really. And each hole has its own secretion gland. They're all secretion glands. And the DMT is produced in a gland actually below the nucleus. There's another part where that's produced. There's a sac that holds fluids. This doesn't. There's some other models that I wish I still had images of that took a long time to find and dig, but this is an
that is beautiful though.
That's the pineal gland.
It is
gorgeous to look at.
Thank you. Let's see. The DMT experience from the pineal gland secretion, as you were going on, let's see. Before that, Raymond, you were saying the Chinese, there's no way that these substances aren't right, and the Chinese weren't. I'm just going to pull up a little fact. When we take a look at the history of Taoism, we can look at the images, the paintings that are ancient Chinese art on meditative experience. And what we find are a lot of mushrooms in the art, and a lot of people taking the mushrooms on the art that they create. And it shows that historically, the origin of Taoism was from mushroom induction. Now it has changed. Masters.
I'm just going to let you know that's not true. I'm just going to let you know that that's not
I can
accurate.
pull up some images.
You can pull them up, and I'm just letting you know that all the things that you come up with from the alchemical period are not describing the origins of Taoism. You're describing a period of Taoism that's much later. The origins of Taoism go all the way back to the plasma scripts into the Jovian period. And the first earliest reference we have of meditation in Chinese texts comes from Zhuangzi. He makes no reference at all to the consumption of mushrooms or any kind of psychedelic. So when you talk about alchemical Taoism, you're talking about Taoism that's post probably 160 AD. That's not the origins of Taoism, and not even the Tao Te Ching is the origins of Taoism. I'm just letting you know. I'm 100% sure that there are pharmacological images of pharmacology in China goes back at least 3,000 years, possibly 5,000 years. A lot of it's borrowed from India, but the descriptions of Taoist origins in the West are wholly inaccurate. Even for the Chinese, they know that those aren't accurate. The word Tao appears in the Book of Mo 130 some times. It appears more in the Book of Mo than it does in the Book of Confucius's Analects, but it appears in the Analects. The Analects are older than the Tao Te Ching, and we know that for a fact at this point.
Now,
So
I'm
just saying. I'm not saying that that no one was consuming mushrooms. I don't think I ever said that. What I'm saying is that you have an emergent process. That emergent process, as Heather described, creates curiosity and creates an interaction. And then you have a reward feedback loop when you interact with those plants, and then they go seeking them out, and they develop more and more interactions with those plants, like ayahuasca. And there's a positive feedback loop. But as she also said, you don't absolutely need it, because the emergent process is already in the body, and we have been modern humans biologically for 250,000 years.
You don't need it. We don't need it, but culture has been inculcated, or if that's the right word, culture has been introduced time and time again through successive breeding in mind fields, that the journey towards the peyote is the experience. Peyote is the reward that gets you to heaven, and when you get there, you fast the entire time, and when you finally get to the peyote, you're exhausted, you're ready to die, and you take that peyote and you go to heaven. It's not a thing that is.
Well, can we talk about it though in terms of medicine, right? If we're going to talk about it in terms of medicine, what is it healing? Is it healing our bodies? Is it healing
culture?
No, as individuals, when we take something like this, it's like anytime mushrooms come to me, I don't go seek out mushrooms. And then it's like, oh, but it happens to be at a time when I need a system reset. And that system reset doesn't happen to be within my body. It happens to be within myself. And I don't need the mushrooms to reset. I know how to do it, but sometimes it's like a sign, right? Like, oh, okay, now it's time. If that's how you read the universe, which I do, and it works okay for me, And I think that so it's like we have the natural ability within us to heal a wound on our leg, but if we apply certain salves made of plant materials, it's going to speed the process and alleviate a scar.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be viewed in that same sense, where if we have an emotional injury, if we have a spiritual injury, it might be a sort of medicinal salve, plant-based medicinal salve, to induce that healing within our own systems. And that's why it's available to us, and we have a receptor for it.
Can I just interject? I don't know that any of us are really in a position to definitively say what we as individuals or collectively as a species need. I think that, I don't need a plate of pasta. I'm way too fat to eat pasta, but I would probably go for it. I mean, I don't, it's not a very defined need. Like, we don't know what we needed to get here. I mean, we don't know when we first ate a mushroom. We don't know how that influenced us. Not everything that we do as human beings is documented in an ancient text. The reality is that we don't know, and that we can assume symbiosis. We can certainly assume that there is a beneficial relationship between things that, grow up and live around us and have evolved with us throughout whatever time we've been on this earth. But I think it's fair to say, oh, this is probably not good. I think there's a whole culture around DMT where, you take sort of this tourist trip down to Mexico and you have these experiences, and people do it 2 or 3, 4, 5 times a year. It's
different.
yeah, the ayahuasca thing, and I think that certainly that can be an aberration of the culture. That's certainly, I could say, I could be judgmental about that. But the reality is if we're talking from a medicinal perspective, or from a cultural perspective, or from an individual perspective, need is extremely subjective. What I needed when I was 21 is not what I need when I'm 50. What you need right now and what I need right now are very, very subjective. Heather, you kind of talk about, the sort of like spiritual dice rolling of when I take mushrooms and when I don't take mushrooms, I feel like they come to me. That could be defined as a reasonable measure of needs. So
how many times do you
would think that
refuse? Also, how many times do you refuse the drug? I mean, sure, it can come when it comes, but do you have discipline to refuse it when it's there? And we all do most of the time for any type of these entheogens, because let's get real. Let's talk about what's happening. We're ingesting God. Entheogens. That's why they've been renamed. So culturally, that's what they are. And worldwide, that's what they've become. That's the name of them. Because it's so important to so many cultures to transform your consciousness to get aligned once in a while. You got to reset. You need once in a while, you need someone to slap you in the face to be like,
yeah, or maybe you don't. Maybe
there's
maybe
this
you prefer just a tap.
Kenna has created where he goes out into the woods with some mycologist friends, and they eat a whole bunch of mushrooms. There's a certain type of mushroom that they were trying to get, and they went out into the wild with like South Africa, and it was some other place. I can't remember where it was, but the point I want to make is, in this experience, what happened is they went haywire in their minds and had to be in nature. If there was clothes, they would have to throw them off because they were fake. If there was anything in their space other than organic nature, living creatures and organisms and the morphing and moving and the field of all that, they would have to throw it out of their space because it cannot exist. And the thing about this, the American experience is not about what we need, but more so what nature needs. It's apparent that when we take a look at what mushrooms do, how they fix the soil for other plants, and or during oil spills, they'll soak up the oil. Oyster mushrooms will soak up all the oil and turn the patch of oil into a plethora of green grass and microbials, and bugs will come down and birds will eat, and soon a big oil spill turns into a lively place. Paul Stamets, he created this patch, and they were doing experiments on oil spills, and it creates life. Versus chemicals, solutions, they don't do the same thing. You take a look at Fukushima, and he's planting mushrooms, and they are impacting the life there once again, allowing things to grow up better, and taking the radiation and cleaning things up. Mushrooms clean our system. They make us feel refreshed, and they allow us to acknowledge something far, far greater than ourself and get connected with it. It's not about what we need more so than a connection to the earth and these fields and these concepts and the subatomic or quantum realm or whatever it is. But it's a connection to something absolutely divine.
Now, if you take this idea and you bring it to death and what you do with your body when you die, and if you allow the nutrients or the birds, some cultures take the body and burn it, set it out to sea. Some cultures bury it. all these are very natural ways. Some people, some cultures take the body up to a mountain and let the vultures have their way with the body. Now, these are all very natural ways to go back into the system of things, but cremation is a little weird in that the nutrients are evaporated and gone and digested in a different way. Although I think that the information is ascertained in the Akashic record, no matter what, whether your body is eaten by a bacterial fungal suit that they have now, an earth-friendly bacterial fungal suit, and or a tree, whether you plant a tree over your body or you burn it, you go into the Akashic no matter what. But I'm not sure the likelihood of reincarnation.
These electrons that pass through our... Did your mic cut out, or did you stop?
No. Well, I was almost done.
Okay, carry on. Please.
I'm not sure exactly where these. Well, basically, I was done finishing my point. Yeah, but if you're eaten by a creature, then you could possibly be transmuted by that creature, and if you believe in reincarnation, then that could be a way. And if you're burned, a lot of cultures look down upon that, and I don't know why. I just throw the point out there.
Okay.
Well, can I just I was thinking of the cremation because
I can't hear you.
Michael Evans, you might have to mute your mic. We're getting some echo.
Hello.
Hello.
Go ahead, Heather.
Well, thank you. I think that the word is reclamation, because when we're going through these other natural processes of decomposition, our nutrients are reclaimed back into the soil or reclaimed into the body of the animal that's eaten us. And when we go through cremation in a sterilized way, that reclamation doesn't occur, you know?
You're saying that consciousness is composed of electrons. It passes through neurons, and in all things there's a transformation of energy.
No, I think consciousness is.
I was talking about like in a natural, right, like nutrient reclamation, like your body decomposes back into the system that fed it to become part of the system to feed something else. And I think that it's also interesting to talk about mushrooms and the experience of it in terms of death, because a lot of times I feel like, well, a lot of my own personal experiences that have brought me to a point of danger or near death have also given me a spiritual experience very similar, but at a much greater magnitude, obviously, than just eating, a gram of mushrooms. But it's kind of the same kind of a thing, because it's this decomposition process of what was before and to feed what will become next in a different type of a sense. And that's also why it's like sometimes getting to these points of spirituality. You talk to a lot of light workers, you talk to a lot of mediums, you talk to people who are on this separate, I don't want to say separate, but like a different level of consciousness in that spiritual way than the average human understanding of it. I think that knocked a bunch of stuff down. That they're have been brought there because they've had like a near-death experience where they've lost somebody very close to them, or they've somehow had to deal with that transcendence, and it's brought them to a point of grievance that has touched that higher plane, and then they stay open to it because they realize it's a gift. So we don't all need to go through that type of tragedy and torment in order to kind of touch the light a little bit, you know what I mean? We could experience it in a milder, more chosen form in some ways, I think.
Thank you, Heather. I like to think of the Akashic records not as a separate entity, not as a separate world, but as part of this world where each atom carries its information of its history, what it's done, what atoms it's interacted with, and the concatenation of how those atoms have all worked together, but each atom carries a memory. And that memory, when we pass on, when we die, and our body is being transformed into the soil and something else, that memory in our atoms carries on into the growth of a tree, into the growth of a bug, into the growth of a plant, whatever it is. And we constantly are eaten and then destroyed, and eaten and destroyed, and then created again into a new life form. But the only way we are created is by being eaten. We become part of the body. It's like when we eat proteins, are created in our body, but the proteins that are in our body carry the atomic history of the past, the chicken that we just ate, which carries the past history, the atomic history of the bugs and the grass the chicken ate.
Yep.
The atomic history of it.
You got platypus in your blood for sure, boy.
Right.
We all got, yeah. The memory is inside of the atom. That this is molecular uniqueness, and I've never found anybody talking about it or researched too much about it. But my dad came up with really kind of pushing me towards the direction of being curious of if every atom is unique, and it seems like everything is unique. Molecular uniqueness and uniqueness on all scales is what we're seeing. Every tiger is different. They're not the same. Every carbon atom's different. They're not the same. But just like every other tiger holds every other tiger together, every other atom holds every other atom together. And we're composed of the same types of things. It's really just electricity expressing itself in the myriad forms that it can as a minimal energy configuration, or reverse or inverse berkland current. An inverse berkland current would be what I define living systems as, when you take double helical twistors and double helical toroidal node filaments like you see in the Dougherty set, and you nest them into quaternion nesting, you get necessitative hierarchical structures that appear as binded wound filaments that could happen inside of the Van Allen belts and inside of the membrane of the Earth, called the Schumann resonance in the Schumann cavity, because everything resonates inside of that. Now you add these things together, and you have light, you have biology, you have the reason why we're talking about the end of the spectrum, which is fungus and death, decomposing the whole cycle of the cyclicity of things, emergent and reemergent phenomena going back to fungus, back to the soil, drawing you back into the out breath, the exhaust. And that's going to be a really good episode. We're going to do a whole episode on exhaust. And exhaust exists on many different loud sounds. The exhaust of a boat, the exhaust of a factory, the exhaust of your body, exhaustion, the cost of exhaustion. We could talk about DMT and tripping experiences all day long, but I have to bring us back to light. And I know specifically, I myself have been pushing the idea of the hydroelectromycelial network, which I believe is pretty much what's happening here inside of the Ouroboros. You have a locked network of hydroelectromycelial. That's it, and the soil is being meliorated for something to come. Just like the dinosaurs were meliorating the soil for us, we're meliorating the soil for something yet greater than us to come. We are an emergent creature inside of an emergent reality with all things that are merging. And technological companies are a great example of that, because what's yesterday's today is today's tomorrow. And they get bought for $1 billion after a couple of months because big boys know who's dealing with the cards and they're playing with it, and it's a technocracy, and this is a technium move, huge gigantic muscle move by the technium. The current situation that we're in, experiencing shutdown of the world, is it has been talked about, and it's germ games, not war games, it's germ games. So I had to throw that in there for a minute. And if Brighton, let me take the steering wheel. I love what you had to show, and with the DMT and everything else. And I wanted to put this out there and let everybody know that Brighton has never even done DMT. Okay, he's not some stoner boy. He's not some kid who doesn't know his shit. He had a near-death experience, and it brought him to geometric visions, and he's decoding them. And that's his life's purpose, one of his life's purpose. Like my life purpose is I had experience a life experience change where I would call it being reborn through geometry, finding Christ through geometry, but literally being drawn into deeper understandings of the chasm of reality and eternality. So Brighton, if we could play this, this quasi crystals versus crystals, we can get back and continue with the episode of light here.
All right.
I think I'll click on it here. And
I just like to say while you're queuing it up that this was one of the things that I got into that helped me find electric universe theory. And so a lot of these theories, I've been so curious to get feedback from the EU perspective on some of these ideas for so long. So I'm very excited to hear what you all have to say.
Okay, you ready for this, Brighton? I'm going to put it on full screen, and then I'm going to click play this time.
I want to tell you about...
All right. 3, 2, 1.
Wait. 3, 2, 1, go.
I want to tell you about crystals. You might be surprised to know that a crystal isn't an expensive piece of glass or a chandelier in some fancy dining room. The word crystal simply means a pattern that is periodic. Look at this checkerboard pattern. See how it continues to spread out infinitely in each direction? That means it's a periodic pattern. So that's a two-dimensional crystal. This is another two-dimensional crystal. And this is another. You can also have three-dimensional crystals. By the way, this 3D glass is called crystal because its atoms are actually arranged in a crystalline pattern. So, see how I'm projecting this three-dimensional crystal to a two-dimensional image on the sand? See how the 2D projection looks distorted because of the angle of the projection? That 2D image also has a pattern, but it isn't periodic. So, it's not a crystal. But there's a deep connection between the 2D object on the sand and the 3D mother crystal. This distorted 2D pattern is called a quasi crystal. A quasi crystal in a certain dimension, in this case 2D, is a projection of a crystal in a higher dimension, in this case 3D. A group of physicists in Los Angeles is working on a new physics theory for a particular 8D crystal. Yep, that's right. An 8-dimensional crystal is projected to 4D at a very particular angle, which forms a 4D quasi-crystal. And from this 4D quasi-crystal, they derive a 3D quasi-crystal, which they believe is the fundamental substructure of all of reality.
Okay. All right.
That quasi-crystal, the E8 quasi-crystalline lattice, I've probably said this a few times on this show, you do some research on it, it's composed of platonic solids only. The E8 structure, up to the 8th dimension, platonic solids only. That's very fascinating. There's that level of structural integrity and
Yes.
equilibrium in the study of the Higgs
Uh,
boson.
yeah, and what's Michael McDuffie's interest in this and my interest in this, we've talked about this a few times. I've had him on my other show, and I've had you on my other show too, Brighton. Eventually, I want to get all the electric universe, each one of us, on my personal show, and because ultimately, underlying paradigm is trying to push that, because it is charge and charge separation that's happening. Now, what I want to show is that the Dougherty set and the Dougherty networks are quasi crystals, and that is very apparent. And that is what, when we started to describe that and show that understanding to Terrence Howard, that some of his shapes, his solids that he's creating, his plasmoids and his wave conjugations are 3D shapes that are already in the Dougherty set. And he saw that immediately, and we showed him that they're ultimately his shapes arranged in a certain way and built in a certain way with a shadow projected down on them would build certain structures that are similar to the Dougherty network. This one, and the square root of 2 one, the first one that I found and have been researching. I think I can rotate this. Yeah, okay. Now, this is a berkland current or a field aligned current, and you can see that there's layers of toroidal layers that are projected and nested inside of each other. And so the Dougherty networks are quasi crystals. A quasi crystal is a 2-dimensional stereoscopic projection of a 3-dimensional object. And there's higher dimensional objects too that are and can be projected into 2-dimensional drawings.
So what they say, buddy, is that it's a 4-dimensional object projected into a 3-dimensional representation.
Yeah,
I think that's what they're actually. That's the mind bender part of it.
yeah.
That's why she sets up this is a 1-dimensional object that's based on a 3-dimensional object, so that she can then take the jump to this 3-dimensional representation of a 4th-dimensional object.
Yes.
And
yes.
that's the kind of mind, that's the connection that you have to make in order to understand what she's saying. Whether you agree with it or not, that's the proposal.
Buddy, can I share an image?
Sure. Yeah. Share it to the group chat. You know how to share it to the chat, right?
I guess so. Or
Yeah,
should
sure. Share it to the chat, and let me know when you get it there.
I don't know how to do that.
You're going to have to open up, it says,
Open up the Skype tab and drag the photo into the chat, which is this rectangular box that says chat on the Skype group call.
Drag it kicking and screaming.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Thank you, Brighton.
I don't know if I can. Hold on.
Right.
While I'm trying to figure this out, oh no, it disappeared. I'd like the idea of reincarnation is, I have a concept that might help. Think about it. Did that happen? The chat, I put the picture on, but I don't know if it worked. Anyway, everyone who's got a belly button should understand reincarnation, because if we just, without any faith, without any belief, knowing that our umbilical cord was physically connected to every other umbilical cord that ever was, to the first umbilical cord, if there ever was a first umbilical cord.
Yes, it's umbilical.
So everything that's ever occurred is still occurring within us. all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all been, everyone who's alive today has survived all of the perils of time immemorial, from Ice Age to tigers and lions and wars and pestilence. Anyone who's present on this planet now has experienced all those survival experiences and has all that experience within their own being. And that's how I see the whole idea of past lives. We've been alive forever.
Yes, we have. And a lot of us mostly forget our lives and our past lives. Now, Brighton, could you...
90% of the brain that they say they don't know what is used for. That's all the past experiences.
I want to tell you about crystals.
We're going to pull up another video here and keep going with the geometry of light. Brighton, you're on the one, right?
On quaternion symmetry. Yeah, this is claimed to be Robert Edward Grant's work.
Yeah, it explains some geometry that I was working with prior to Robert Grant
All right.
describing different geometries within it. But this will help you understand more to where I'm starting to point, because everything's pointing the nose at the Dougherty set, the Dougherty network. Why is everything square root of 2? Like umbilical root connected with these spirals that seem to be Brachistochrone lenses. Brachistochrone lenses, or lenses that are bent with the curvature of how light moves. Specifically, and what Fresnel lens. We'll get into Fresnel lenses later and why they are what they are. But you ready to go? I'm going to open it up here. We don't have to do all
you do
of
the
it.
countdown.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Out of the void came one voice, and the one became many. And the many became chaos, for they knew not their place within the whole symphony. Until, under the guiding principles of order, discipline, balance, measure, time, and harmony, the many remembered again their oneness. Could it be that science, hearing the sound of many waters within the seemingly chaotic interference patterns of our reality, has forgotten the art of listening for that one vibration? When circular waves encounter others, they create Vesica Pisces patterns within themselves. And this repetitive dance of duplication actually creates everything we experience in our daily lives. Science tells us it's all nothing but waveforms and mathematical probabilities. But in 2018, Robert Grant compared many of the known math and physical constants against their fractals or inverse decimal and angular values on a circle, expanding upon the study of quaternion symmetry. Nikola Tesla asserted that the secrets of the universe are embedded in the numbers 3, 6, and 9. And so Grant postulated the hexagonal integer 6 to be the center, the mirror reflection crossover point from which, radiating outward, numbers converge and overlap at various nodes. He hypothesized that numbers both create and emerge out of these wave propagations, and thus all constants manifest at the geometrical intersections between their x and 1 over x representations. The first of these conjunctions occurs at the center, where the golden ratio phi and its 1 over x little phi manifest. These are framed by the Euler-Mascheroni constant gamma and its close inverse, the square root of 3. The next conjunctions manifest fractals of pi and the Euler number e. These are framed by the cubed root of gamma and a light speed reference, c, against e minus 2 and a presently unknown new constant. The next conjunction manifests the squares of phi, framed by its square root and the fine structure constant, alpha, giving rise to yet another pair of new constants. At the Tesla integers 3 and 9, we find pi and its 1 over x fractal, which reveal 3.1623, a most significant balance between pi and its inverse, producing 2 more brand new constants. Moving further out, each subsequent framing simultaneously converges and diverges like concave and convex lenses, concentrating and dispersing energy. Thus we can see visually how the separation of light and dark is achieved mathematically. And perhaps we begin to understand more fully how the Einsteinian concept itself of space-time emanates from precisely such a dynamic wave function. As already shown, this new understanding predicts that at each halving of a wave, another mirroring constant must inherently result from the convergence. We are therefore able to predict with mathematical certainty where new, presently unknown constants will be found along an infinitely ever-expanding wave. Thus, from a simple x against 1 over x analysis, a unifying mathematical theory emerges, revealing an elegant structure hidden within an age-old mystery. Since all the major constants, pi, phi, e, alpha, appear at these convergences, and presently unknown constants are now geometrically predictable, we see they are all pure quaternion reflections of the most fundamental constant of all, the integer 1. These findings even suggest that ancient references to a voice of many waters may literally be an accurate metaphor, developing a unique variant of the original Pythagorean tuning, which postulates that true A above middle C should be 432 cycles per second, or hertz. Grant has found that the musical notes themselves emerge from the intersections of these overlapping waves. Their hertz values correspond exactly to their angular relationships on a circle, requiring only minimal equal temperament adjustments to become a viable tuning alternative. And thus we have come, one might say, full circle to the pure, balanced alchemy of science and art, resolving the chaos of the many back into the unity of the one.
And that's that. So that shows a little bit of quaternion symmetry.
Quaternion multiplication. Or rather, you're looking at a certain representation.
A little bit of quaternion symmetry in how the Dougherty network works along one of the branches. So I wanted to point that out and put that there, and then move to the next one, which is higher dimensional breakthrough. So we can start to learn about these higher dimensional nested hyperspheres, and then show some more images that I'm working on, having to do with hyperspheres and the Dougherty network and other things. Let me get it ready.
Yeah.
Watch this whole thing, guys. What's that, Brighton?
You do the countdown.
All right, we're gonna watch this whole thing, guys. So it's a little break here. I'm gonna mute myself ahead of time because I couldn't do that. So here we go. Actually, I'm gonna do the countdown, then mute myself because you need it, Brighton. 3, 2, 1. Boom.
Three-dimensional oranges are stacked in grocery stores, but what do you think the best way to stack 100-dimensional oranges is? I'm Kelsey Houston Edwards, and this is Infinite Series, a new PBS digital show about mathematics. The study of math is old, really old, but right now it's expanding faster than ever. Each week, we'll explore a new corner of this puzzling universe that's being carved out by mathematicians right now. For today, it's hyperspheres. What the heck are those? Well, it's a sphere in dimensions that are bigger than 3. And while stacking hyperspheres has surprising practical applications in error-correcting codes, which help ensure accuracy when transmitting data, like through cell phones, satellites, and the internet, I want to talk about them mainly because they're cool. Their properties are counterintuitive, and even seemingly simple questions about hyperspheres are hard to answer. But before we get there, let's start with spheres. It's easy to define a sphere in any dimension. It's all the points that are a fixed distance away from a central point. On a two-dimensional plane, you can imagine holding a rod fixed at one end and spinning the other end to trace out a circle. In 3 dimensions, the same trick works, but now the rod has more freedom to move and traces out a sphere. In higher dimensions, this traces out a hypersphere. So what does that look like? Well, before we go there, let's talk about what mathematicians mean when they say higher dimensions. We can visualize one dimension as a line, but another way to think about it is all the points described by one coordinate, which we usually call x. 2 dimensions is just all the points described by 2 coordinates, usually called x and y. 3 dimensions is just 3 coordinates. That means it takes 3 numbers to describe a point in 3-dimensional space. 2 numbers alone isn't enough to give directions to a specific point in 3-dimensional space. Even though you can't really visualize it, 4-dimensional space is just the point specified by 4 coordinates, 8-dimensional space is just 8 coordinates, and so on. Mathematicians have wondered for centuries about the optimal way to fill space with equal-sized, non-overlapping spheres, what's known as sphere packing. You can try the 2-dimensional version at home. How should you arrange pennies on a table so that you have the least amount of table showing between the pennies? At best, you can cover about 91% of the table. What about in 3 dimensions? Way back in 1611, famed astronomer Johannes Kepler guessed that the best way to pack 3-dimensional spheres are this and this. These 3D sphere arrangements are intuitive. It's how tennis balls or oranges are often stacked in stores. They waste the least amount of space between balls, filling about 74% of total space. Kepler was right, but it took nearly 400 years for mathematician Thomas Hales to actually prove Kepler's conjecture. But what about sphere packing in higher dimensional space, where spheres are less intuitive? Mathematicians have struggled to prove anything about sphere packing in dimensions bigger than 3. However, just a few months ago, in March 2016, mathematician Marina Vyazovska proved the best way to pack spheres in 8 and 24 dimensions. The standard way to pack spheres in 3 dimensions has an analog in higher dimensions, but the spheres move further away from each other as the dimension increases. Then, something special happens in 8 dimensions. In 8 dimensions, there's exactly enough room between the spheres to squeeze in new ones. For a detailed explanation of Vyazovska's ideas, check out the Quanta article in the description. Now here's the totally wild part. Mathematicians don't know the best strategy for packing spheres in any other dimensions. We only know the best arrangements in dimensions 2, 3, 8, and 24. That's it. All the other dimensions are pretty mysterious. Part of why sphere packing in higher dimensions is so difficult is that hyperspheres are basically impossible to visualize. People have used different visual representations of higher dimensional spheres, particularly in 4 dimensions. One method mathematicians find useful is to look at slices. Think about it this way. If you pushed a 3-dimensional ball through a 2-dimensional surface, like a table, the portion of the ball intersecting the surface would always look like a disk. First a tiny disk, getting bigger, and then getting smaller again. The disk is a 2D slice of the ball. Similarly, if a crazy 4-dimensional creature took a 4-dimensional ball and pushed it through our 3-dimensional world, we'd see it as a 3-dimensional ball. First, a tiny ball, then bigger, and then smaller. These are the 3D slices of a 4-dimensional ball. After 4 dimensions, our visual imaginations are pretty much useless. Here's 2 thought experiments to show how weird hyperspheres are. First, what happens if you confine a sphere to a cube? Start with a 2D square and draw a circle that just barely touches the 4 edges. Analogously, in 3 dimensions, draw a cube and inside it a sphere that touches all 6 sides. The circle takes up 79% of the square, but the sphere only takes up 52% of the cube. The pattern continues in higher dimensions. Inside an n-dimensional cube, nestle a sphere that just barely touches all 2 times n sides. As the dimension n goes up, the percentage of the cube that's occupied by the sphere gets smaller and smaller, approaching 0. In 30 dimensions, the sphere is about 10 to the -13th the size of the cube inside it. This is about how big a grain of sand is relative to a sports arena, except that in this analogy, the sand grain is touching each wall of the sports arena and is still round. Yeah, I know that's weird, but just stay with me and let's try one more experiment with cubes and spheres to see if we can understand what a hypersphere looks like. Take a 2-dimensional box and cut it into quarters. Draw a circle filling each one of these 4 boxes. Now, draw another circle in the center of the box that just barely touches the other 4 circles. Notice that the interior black circle is far inside the box. Now, let's try the whole thing in 3D. Start with a cube and split it into 8 equal parts, or octants. Place a sphere so that it perfectly nestles inside each octant. In the center of the whole cube, draw a sphere so that it touches each of the other 8 spheres. Again, this sphere is way inside the cube. We can repeat the same thing in higher dimensions, nestling 2 to the n equal-sized spheres into an n-dimensional cube, and constructing a central sphere that touches the others. The central sphere gets bigger as the dimension goes up. But here's the totally mind-blowing part. At 9 dimensions, the central sphere touches the sides of the cube. After 9 dimensions, the sphere actually bursts through the sides of the box. Why is this happening? Roughly because as the dimension goes up, the distance between opposing faces of the cube stays the same, while the diagonal distance between opposite corners gets longer and longer. See? Hyperspheres are totally counterintuitive, but that's part of what makes them so awesome. If you have a cool way of visualizing hyperspheres, let us know in the comments. I'll see you next week on Infinite Series.
Hey, buddy, there's
This video was sponsored by Novo Resume.
Shoot.
If you have a paper and pencil nearby, go ahead and put 4 dots anywhere.
There's a image in the group chat on Michael Evans' comment about the umbilical cord and the fractal nature of our existence. It's down at the bottom. Yeah, right there.
Nice.
Yeah. There's a connection between, I think, the brainstem and the umbilical cord. At least I've been noticing that all systems of growth in the human body mimic one system, and it's like a bubble that is having this. What's that called? That we just looked into when bubbles do what? They fold in on themselves. anyhow, pardon me?
They implode?
Implode, there's another word. But yeah, there's this geometry that's mimicking in the kidneys, the liver, the gonads, the ovaries, even how the baby fits inside the womb, and the umbilical cord that extends out to then connect it to other organs and other systems. It is a history of lifelines.
Yeah, a couple things I wanted to say after that video, Brighton, you went right into things, is that the Dougherty network is a hyperspherical vortical coordinate system. So
Okay.
now you're starting to see more of where the Dougherty net is, what it is in relation to other things, and
Are you going to start modeling in the fourth and higher dimensions?
you don't even need to. You can. I mean, there's four-dimensional software now. I was talking with all the guys, with Henry Siegerman and other designers on top of a roof singing songs in Canada. It was great. And they're modeling this stuff fourth dimensionally, and it's really weird to even look at. It doesn't even make sense to look at, and they try to explain it, and it's hard to even understand. So it might be more understandable. Some of the stuff that I was looking at was more advanced, but the other stuff that Henry Siegerman was coming out with back in 2017, that you've taken us on other episodes, walking through hyperdimensional dodecahedrons and hyperdimensional honeycombs, and you can walk through them, four-dimensional honeycombs. They've developed software. But what I wanted to bring the correlation to is you can see the four-dimensionality of it, and it's already written. The math is already done by Vladimir B. Ginsburg. I'm like MC Escher drawing patterns of infinitude or infinite those geometries. There wasn't a math to describe those. He just did it. Just like I'm doing the math and the geometry of berkland currents. There isn't a math to this. I just did it, and that's what's happening. The universe is regurgitating, and the youth are having visions to speak to the elderly. And there's a global transformation, and we are being turned into and tuned into a new world government right now, and it's the technium, it's the technocracy. And during this influx of information and saturation of hardware and infrastructure, our bandwidth is going to go up, and there's going to be a lot more information out there. And we're going to be more able to describe things in more intricate ways and interact in virtual ways that were never even thought possible yet. As far as the umbilical thing, absolutely. The whole thing is umbilical. And
every frequency, every phenomena in the universe is umbilical.
It's attached to other things, yes. Absolutely.
Well, it explains the Akashic records, where they came up with that concept. Since everything's connected, and light is a solid, not a wave, not a particle, but a solid, it contains the information of everything that ever was.
I'm going to share my screen here and show you guys this holography, this type of hollow fractal holography type of it's hollow. So let me, if I can stop sharing my screen, stop sharing, share my screen and show you these. The Dougherty set is a multi-dimensional, or an infinity sphere. I can't see my whole screen, unfortunately. Michael, can you stop sharing your video?
I saw that. I'm,
It's at the center, yeah.
I don't know how. I don't know how this even
You just got to
happened.
click on the thing that looks like a video camera at the center of the bottom of your screen with your mouse. It looks like a video camera. Just click on it.
There we go.
It work?
I still can't see myself, but you, because I can't see what I'm showing or about to show. But anyway,
11 is
I'll show
showing
it.
his screen. Maybe you need to hit, buddy, maybe you need to hit screen share. It looks like Michael Evans is showing his screen.
Oh, Michael, you hit the wrong thing. You hit screen share.
Buddy, you need to hit screen share on your screen.
No, he took screen share.
It says stop. It says I stopped sharing.
There we go.
Right here. Now I have to stop sharing.
I'm gonna cut out.
Okay, sorry, Michael. I'm not. I'm just.
I'm sorry.
Trying to make this happen here. We'll talk next week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Sorry I screwed it up.
No, you didn't screw up anything. You can stay here. Whatever. Anyway.
I'm still getting it.
Yes, stay here. I'm trying to cancel this here.
Me too, and I can't quit Skype.
Okay. You guys can see me, right? Me, my body?
I thought you
there we go.
saved your head.
There we go. All right, this is what I wanted to show, guys. This is...
That's the toroidal structures.
I can't hear you, Brighton. Breaking up.
Nested toroidal structures.
You're still breaking up, Brighton. But I believe I'm sharing. Michael, could you let me know if you can see this?
I can see it.
Wow, you're okay, you guys can see it. Okay, well, I'm just going to continue. These are hyperspheres, hyperspheres nested within hyperspheres, or hypertoroids nested within hypertoroids. And you can see the breakdown here, how it comes out of the pattern of the pine cone, producing Joachim and Boaz, the pillars on both sides. And there's the toroidal harmonic pattern, but it's basically just based off of this 12 recursion of itself over here. So I wanted to show you that these are nested Hopf Fibrations and Twistors, and I wanted to also go to my home page. You guys can still hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Because a minute ago you cut out, Brighton, and I wanted to hear what both you guys had to say.
It looked like nesting toroidal structures.
Cutting out again. Maybe it's a connection on my side. All right. Maybe someone's using the internet here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my Facebook.
Say, why don't you get Ethernet and set up a hardwire at the house? Less Wi-Fi, less beaming. That's what I have at my house. It's fast. It's efficient.
I'm somewhere else right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So the last thing that I wanted to show here is I'll go to my home page and I'll show the Hopf Fibrations. If I can get to my home page here, right here.
If you want any information on setting up Ethernet, I can help you out with that.
Thank you, Brighton. Yeah, we might have to do something here, definitely, at the place I'm at right now. They need some some better. Okay. This is what I wanted to show. And this might be the cover image for the show. We'll see. But yeah, you can see the knots. You can see twistors, you can see the knots, you can see the layers, you can see hyperspheres, you can see hypertoroids. It's all there. And so I just wanted to close with that, and let it be in the hands of the observer. We've played a lot of the math on this episode to come to the conclusions, the differential equations, differential calculus, to write out what it is that the hierarchical system is. Personally, I think that all waves are nested in here. They're always there. The field is always there, and it's just where the charge is that allows certain things to be at certain layers. And then you only see it at certain layers because that's where the charge exists. But all the other layers on the above it and below it are always there. All right, you guys got any questions, any comments? I know it's nearing towards that time here.
No, but I have your music I can play if you want to end it with that.
All right. Well, yeah, we could end it with that, and I'll just go through some images. That works.
Okay, we're not seeing your screen, just so you know.
Oh, dang it. Damn it. That's what I was trying to show. Fuck. Thanks for letting me know. Damn it all, but damn it. All right. There it is.
Now we can see your screen.
Okay, this is what I was.
Gorgeous.
It was just a little bit. So you can see the layers within layers, and everything being able, the hyperdimensional spheres. We have the math. This is the math of twistors, the math of spinors, the math of Hopf fibrations, the math of the differential equations of Maxwell that he wrote for what electromagnetism is. All this is the same language. This is for the viewers, for the YouTubers out there. Put all this shit together. It all exists inside the Dougherty Network. I'm just a conduit to push the charge, the ideas, and the energy moving forward. So this is the geometric view, episode 2, season 2.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah, we're taking questions. Go ahead.
Buddy, it's good to talk to you again. How have you been?
Doing good, Michael. What's up?
No, I was just wondering. I mean, it sounds like the conclusions that you guys drew based on this episode were kind of a holographic topological theory.
Yeah, it is a holographic topological type of perturbation. There is a charge and charge separation going on inside of these layers that are hierarchically nested. So there's a pre-essence here. There's a pre-geometry to the emergent geometry that we're experiencing in our everyday life.
And spiritual connection as well.
So like, so just to reiterate, because I kind of came in late, and I'm sorry, but so like the pineal gland is kind of like the CPU of our body type thing, that like, you know, catalysts this reoccurring wavelength of life type thing. Does that kind of jive with what you're?
The pineal gland is not the central processor. No, there are other components in the brain that would probably be considered the central processor. The pineal gland is just a connection to the astrological. Or how dreams might be induced.
Oh, so okay. Do you guys believe dreams can be, or we project reality rather through our dreams, through uh, multi phases of reality or whatever, or something like that, rather?
Um, I uh, I think there's two kinds of dreams. One is in our head, created and generated by the subconscious, and there is another type of dream, which is not necessarily a dream, it's rather a connection to the world, like astral projecting. Although this
Like an
can be at
idea.
any scale, whether it's cosmological or uh, uh, quantum and subatomic. We can be at any scale in reality in the Akashic realm.
And experiences are happening with living creatures on every level.
So the ideas from our dreams are kind of creating reality?
Yeah, absolutely. We have dreams. Our dreams are to test us and to see what we're going to do in future situations that we might not be in. That's one of the things. One of the things is, are you gonna are you gonna stab someone? Are your dreams about killing people? Are your dreams about um, uh, floating? Are your dreams about
Past
flying?
lives?
Well, to transverse the fourth dimension and enter a consciousness packet bubble where our consciousness floats into this time time zone in the future that states an occurrence that may happen. We've been over previous discussions if time was a fractal, like a Mandelbrot set, and each zoom that you do can change uh, the future of what the fractal is going to look like, depending upon where you're looking. And as you zoom, it would be you moving forward in the future. So zooming is moving forward in the future.
So would
Now the concept with
that kind
this
of
is that the dream world is which Buddy is saying is that there's the future or the past impact us in the present, and as you zoom into the future, you move into the future, you zoom into the Mandelbrot, you can move it towards one occurrence, move towards that dream realm. It's just a future insight of what might happen in the fractal or what might happen in the future of time.
This is a good example right here.
okay.
This picture depicts, here's the sun at the center of the nucleus of the Dougherty set. The sun has a CME, coronal mass ejection. Okay. Now we know based off of space weather that it had one by seeing it. Then we can detect it here. This is magnetic hysteresis. Then we can detect it here, here. So we can see the future and we know how to prepare in the present right here because it's going to hit us. Then here is even the future, here's us, and we know how these events happen because the tail ends are always generally similar. So
Helical.
all of all of science is nothing but based on faith that our patterns are going to predict past behaviors. They're going to predict this, they're going to repeat the same pattern. That's all science is. The only thing science is faith that the pattern is going to repeat itself. That's all. So science is backed up by faith.
May I ask something?
Yeah.
Okay, in your Dougherty set picture, I see a lot more than just that helix. Would that be an implication of parallel realities that might have, or what are your thoughts on that?
All possibilities are there. The field is always there. It's just where the charge is moving in the field at the time. All those possibilities are there. That's why there's such thing as um, uh, particle where is it? Where multiple superpositioning of particles, because the cloud of probability of a place or a situation or a particle to collapse where it is dependent on the field and the field trajectory and the spin and hierarchical other spins that are dictating where things are falling in place.
Sounds like an inevitability factor there.
Well, that's
Everything and
why.
everything that can happen will happen. Type thing.
Well, maybe not. I'm not really sure. I can't hypothesize at that, but I know that there is an elect. There is an elect of dog. There is an elect of human. There is an elect um, tree. Which, when I mean that, there is a special selection in all phylums that are leading the trail and as the blazers for the rest of the creatures. We have this in the United States, or we have this in the world as the Olympics. The Olympics are the ones that are leading the trailblazers on physical strength. Then you have the technocracy leading on mental strength and what is possible for the super endurance of the super creature, possibility of humankind, and human manipulation is obviously more endurant inside of the mind and psychological warfare, meaning
Like
the
with our
technocracy can rule the world and already does. They already took over from the West Coast, from the East Coast, who used to have the power of the world in Washington, over to the West Coast, who now has the power of the world because of technocracy and technology companies and rising and emergent new technologies, because we're so connected that they automatically control what's going on because they have the back doors and own the property of the machines.
Do you think AI consciousness is already kind of fused with the collective organic consciousness?
It's already, that's what's happening right now. It's a muscle move by the technium. The thriving veins are getting stronger by the day. Every day that we use our electronic devices, it's building the technocracy and technium to be even more. The only way to beat what's going on is to set down our devices and stop using them.
That's a good point.
Okay.
Because technocracy is not actually sustainable for the human body and our biological organisms. So in the future, there is a possibility that we might be looking towards a future where our bodies are inside of robots and
we already are.
Surrounds us.
Brighton, we already are. That we are literally we
organic?
have become. Hang on, hear me out. We have become the tech. We have become the gut fauna, the gut microbiome of and wetware of a larger hierarchical system, and that is technology. Humans are carrying it and moving it around where it goes, and that is the money maker. The money maker is you moving from point A to point B. They make money on that. We don't see any of that money. The money that you the stuff that you put out, the content as a content creator, you don't see any money of that. Not unless you use the right channels. That's money in their pocket. This is a huge muscle grab from, and I keep saying muscle grab, but you can see technology taking over, saying stay home. Oh yeah, stay home. Homeschool your kids. When's the last time you heard the government say that? Never.
Huh. I think they're gonna be starting to say it now, though.
Yep. Fuck yeah, they are. Because this is Google. My boy works for Google, and I know a bunch of other people, and this is literally what's happening. Everyone's talking about a fucking virus. No, it's Bill Gates doing germ games. He already said he was going to do it. We all agreed and said we need it to happen to test our infrastructure. This is mandated government already plan. Fact.
Or in the future, this will be like WALL-E. Remember, I don't know if you've seen WALL-E, but they have this thing called Big Corp or something like that. And the children are in this room learning their ABCs, and it goes A is for apple, B is for big corp is really good for you. Have a big gulp. C is for, and they go on with that. But technology, our education system, if it becomes all online and all at home, let's say 2 or 3 generations in the future, we will be run by technology, media sources that just are mind rotting.
The only way to back out is to back out now, Brighton. And there's nobody backing out. Nobody's even talking about it happening other than me. I don't fucking hear it from anybody.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah.
Do you think that you could create a thought pattern sequence in your head for your electromagnetic field that you produce to kind of filter out those negative ideas and negatively charged positive ions, and bad intention?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think we can turn serial criminals into positive individuals. That's a good question.
I think they have to turn themselves into it through hard dedication and work with their consciousness. That it takes time, and it takes a system set up that they can grow in. I don't know if you've heard of Jasara Nasara.
Hang on. Brighton, you're right. Which is what religion is for. Religion is for us to have a system so we can become more intelligent and think about a world thought, a worldview. Go ahead.
Okay. There's this thing called Jasara Nasara, but further, just a little outlook into it is, what if everyone in the United States was able to be supplied a bed, food, devices to do research and study and educate themselves with,
schooling and work at home,
a general income that allows them to maintain being able to wash their body, food, and being under a roof. So everyone in America, at least, has a general income that allows them to live.
Well,
that's just given.
That's already happened all over the world in a bunch of other countries, and you know what it is, right? It's communism. That's what it is. Well, they literally subsidize people's income, and it fails.
If we set up systems based on AI, farming systems that pick crops more efficiently, and we generate everything so that it's automatic, we can absolutely maximize the amount of food, produce that comes in, and everything else, so that everyone has food. There's enough food for everyone. There's enough housing for everyone, and there's warmth. Everyone has a heater, and all that's left, is to decide if you're okay with just living with only that, or if you want more as a person. And more as a person means getting an education. And then education would be free, because the taxpayer dollar wouldn't be 80% to the military. It would be 60 or less percent to the military, and the rest could go to free college
or Google and Facebook.
Yeah. And so you have
Brighton?
and the yes.
Do you think I'm sorry, you're working with such big thoughts. I'm gonna have to come back. Sorry for interrupting.
Michael, you were mentioning working on yourself with or people being able to work on themselves with negative and positive energy.
Actually, thank you for reminding me. I was wondering if in this whole process, when you come to harmony with yourself and you get on that level ground where you're able to encompass other algorithms in order to expand your conscious and awareness, like, what do you make of all of this? Like,
expanding your consciousness can hurt a lot. Everyone wants to expand consciousness, but expanding it opens you up to realizing so much more, all the nano details that surround you that you never knew your feelings about. It's getting in touch with your subconscious a lot deeper. So becoming more aware of what's going on can hurt. And ways to deal with this, well, we've got to find a medium to express ourselves, whether it be through art, whether it be through music, whether it be through dance, whether it be through nature, running, exercise, whatever. But we have to find a medium.
And that's why I really like to reiterate these things about us being reoccurring wavelengths, you know, fulcrums that extend from our centers that we can just layer upon and, you know, incorporate more details and awareness to compensate for all the on the other side of all their, you know, consolidation, or, you know, all their layering. You know, it's kind of like a game of tag with the universe. When you're playing consciousness tag, you're either the observer or the creator, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of consuming meaning watching media and zoning out, or playing games and zoning out rather than generating. Generating is a whole nother thing than consuming. And everyone needs to, at some point in their life, be generating. There's two things in life. Your consciousness always has to be doing something. Always. You can't stop that. When you're awake, that's just how it is. So you can do one of two things. You can either improve on yourself for what you see and believe is improvement, or you can distract yourself. And if you distract yourself, you don't have return on investment. You don't have return on yourself.
Thank you, Brad.
Not as much. Not as much. You can be distracted with TV and you can still take a lot in, but if you don't write it down, if you don't remember it, you don't have.
I think focus is the key on the right things. Also, I'm right there with Brighton.
Then do something with it. You've always got to do something and make it physical, make it tangible, make it, or even digital or visual, understandable. It's not just you. This is whatever idea you have is for everyone.
It's a collective consciousness.
Yeah. When you're writing down what you see in a movie, make it, let's say you're watching a movie about creating food, then think about what they've done and write it down and express on that, and then go to the grocery store and go make some beautiful food.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Getting dirty with your hands and experimenting. That's the difference between an educated erudite and someone who actually has field experience. You can read from home all day long, but let's see you build a wall when the time comes.
I'm about breaking down walls, sir.
That too.
I've actually just, me and a couple other constituents are going worldwide with a networking site.
Nice.
A networking network, actually, a group of sites that focus on networking to get, you know, philanthropists and entrepreneurs what they need by connecting them with others.
Share your site, man. What is it? Share it to the comments, and I'll share it, and I'll put it in. and I'll put it inside the. But what is it out loud? Say it,
Oh,
please.
it's fundable foundations integrations.
Okay, and then share the link to the Skype, and I'll put it in the YouTube for the comments below. But
Buddy,
I gotta
sincerely.
close the episode down, guys. Otherwise, it's gonna last forever. As much as I'd like to.
Yeah. All right. Well, I have the music cue whenever you're ready.
Anyway,
right.
thank you very much again for the link.
Yep. Thank you, Michael Camaro, and we'll continue. And mute your mic, everybody, except for Brighton, and we'll. I wanted to hear more from Michael McDuffie, but I always want to hear more from Michael McDuffie, so I'll catch up with him on the Electric View tomorrow. And everybody feel free to join in. It's a live conversation every week on Sunday from 1:30 to whenever we end. All right. Love you all. And go ahead with the link with the music, Brighton.
What are we bringing, son? We bringing tracks for your back, but we bringing it back towards the front, and we're bringing it towards the towards the rear, but we ain't talking about nothing but the exterior. Know your interior, yep. Better know your orifices, because it's all about where it comes and goes out. Excrement, instrumentation, yeah. Better know your mind, better know your aisles, better know what your timing, girl. Slip into invisibility, cloak yourself, center yourself inside of that dagger, or define yourself inside of that. Fill it up, chalice. Don't be pretentious. Help yourself out of that circle that you made yourself. With that pentacle, I know you're dark soul. Rich, even though you dig out of the chasm, pull yourself up. Enrich in the fiber of life, the fiber of life, the vibration, the vibration. 1.61803398887. Put yourself and pick yourself up. But yourself is not even that cup that you not even visualized full. Don't put yourself outside until you're overflowing, because the spirit is that. All it is moisture overflowing. Ripples over and over and over and ripples over and over. Flow. Never go outside until you're overflowing with spirit. Test the spirit so you know the one. Which one are you? It's a vibration, you can change it. It's ancient, it is one. God, it's dust, it's dust, it's dust.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining us in the Geometric View, Episode 2, Season 2. Have a good weekend, and stay safe. And air out your house. Don't let that COVID stay dormant inside of your freaking house. All right. Love you all. Have a good weekend. The Geometric View is Loveiswatching product. Loveiswatching production. Thank you for doing that. Executive producer for the Geometric View is Buddy James Dougherty. Thank you, Heather, Michael, Brighton, Tess. Music is by the acronym Beauty, the acronym BUD, and Abyssal Dionysus is the geometer. Special thanks to Hartmut Miller
me and Brighton. Thank you, Vladimir B. Ginsburg. Thank you for being here. Catch you next Saturday. Thank you, Brian.
Oh, top of the way morning to you. Top of the way morning to you. Don't we do this? Oh, it's gonna be good, yes. It's a great day. Just when you think you're wreaking havoc upon us, your magic is gone and as if it dissipates in the wind. What you thought you had a plan and now it's debunked. You pull the wool over the eyes disguising the beast beneath and conveniently peeking through your privates and obelisk. Ominous obvious is a motive of malarkey. Park a car in the dark and embark in your abode. Know your home is where your heart has started the beginning. You're prepared.
No way home, so make your way home. No way home, so make your way home.
Start at the beginning and I'm already sinning again. Am I gonna make it home in the body bag? Only to find that I'm molding a king of continents, holding up a soul and a 1 foot in the pool. And I am full of thinking this plan could really work out.
Helping in a medium and need to re-immerse and arise from a simple mind. Die several times over, be the new beginning who is in us to the end. You know the one to speak about.
Make a switch, the situation's gonna make you afraid. Make a switch, the situation's gonna make you fade. Make a switch, the situation's gonna make you afraid. Make a switch, the situation's gonna make you fade. Make a switch, the situation's already faded. Now you flip the switch and each and every inch is light. Now you're gonna make it home for dinner. Now that you're gonna make it home for dinner.
Found the way home. Find your way home.
We're gonna make you flip and go berserk. We're gonna make you work until you sweat. We're gonna drink tears until you thirst. We're gonna steal your heart and wrap it in eternity until the earth turns and turns and turns.
Now if I could tell you what you're doing, you'd be losing if you don't dare to be the difference. Stare into the rise and tell them that you love them. A hug is all that some of us need, but love is what all of us bleed. Jesus Christ is the one that freed him. We can need him, we can drink his blood as a symbol of self-sacrifice. I said it all, there it is, everything. Take the ingredients and bake a cake, a cake.
Found
the way home. Find your way home.
We're gonna make you flip and go berserk. We're gonna make you work until you sweat. We're gonna drink tears until you thirst. We're gonna steal your heart and wrap it in eternity until the earth turns and turns and turns. We're gonna make you flip and go berserk. We're gonna make you work until you sweat. We're gonna drink tears until you thirst. We're gonna steal your heart and wrap it in eternity until the earth turns and turns and turns and turns. We're gonna make you flip and go berserk.